Awesome. Okay, I think we're live now. Alrighty. I think we're live. So, yeah, that took a mess to set up, but it got set up, so that's good. I'm just gonna double check that I'm streaming on my phone, because it's kind of a mess. But we're all good. And it says I'm live. And here, I'll be right back. Be back soon. Awesome. Okay. I think we're good. My brother's checking. Yeah. This is very different, so it's kind of new to this, but yeah, I guess so I've got this book here. It's called The Proverbs of Leadership, and I'm gonna read it from cover to cover, so yeah. Am I set up, Cookie?
Checking. Yeah, it says you're live.
I know it says I'm live here too. Can you see anything? Awesome, perfect. Awesome. I guess I'll just start, and then I'll probably cut this whole section out. But I just want to double check where I'm at first. I am at 254, so I'll probably cut it out to the 230 mark, or the 250 mark. Anyways, chapter 1. Darius walked briskly from his dwelling in the lower quadrant of the city and cautiously made his way toward the palace complex on the hill. The streets of the walled city were essentially deserted, as the merchants and traders had closed their shops hours ago. Nonetheless, he kept a wary eye on the shadows, for on this night, like most as of late, a certain eeriness pervaded the air. The king's heir had an apparent contingent of spies, and Darius was keenly aware that any record of his attendance at the meeting could threaten his life in the days to come. He kept the hood of his cloak over his head, and hoped that he had not been followed. This was the 6th clandestine meeting in the past fortnight to which Darius had been summoned. He and the other men who made up this secret council had by default assumed the leadership of the kingdom of Solomon, withdrew more and more into himself. They had effectively steered the nation during the past 18 tumultuous months, but now several crises had been erupted, and the perils seemed to worsen by the hour. Alarmed by its tone, he clutched the cryptic note, which requested his presence at the palace, and pondered the possible reason for the urgency of its summons. King Solomon, the revered wise ruler of days gone by, lay on his deathbed, and his incoherent ramblings bordered on the blasphemous. Meanwhile, his son and soon would-be successor, Prince Rehoboam, was firmly entrenched by the palace door and gleefully awaited the passing, a superstitious lover of pleasure, with a council of fools directing his every move. The young prince was barely able to conceal his wicked joy as he held court among the lackeys loyal to his cause, and waited to seize power once his father was laid to rest. The normal transition from king to heir would have itself been enough for Darius and the other royal advisors to contend with, but escalating troubles at home and abroad magnified the tension tenfold. Throughout the kingdom, rumors abounded that the prince would soon put to the sword any and all that refused to acknowledge his right to the crown. Beyond the nation's borders, yet no less severe, a financial crisis of Solomon's making loomed large and threatened the stability of the entire region. And the lingering effects of the king's diplomatic blunders had increased the probability of war and ground nearly to a halt the nation's trade with its neighbors. Darius increased his pace the last quarter mile to the palace and reflected upon the calamities which had been spawned by the missteps of his king. The 12 nomadic tribes of Israel had formed into a fledgling nation nearly 75 years ago by the sheer determination of Solomon's father, the mighty warrior King David. But now the young nation, which had begun with such promise and potential, teetered on the edge of anarchy due to Solomon's forced labor programs, his burdensome taxation plans of recent years, and the corresponding corruption and decline of his moral example. It had not always been so, for the people had once held Solomon in the highest regard. His focus and foresight during the building of the great temple so many years ago had won them to his side, and a sense of national pride was shared by most as monarchs from distant lands journeyed to Jerusalem to pay homage to their king. But as Solomon's ego began to grow in proportion to his prominence among the rulers of the East, he undertook the massive rebuilding of the cities captured by his father David, and expected, indeed demanded, his people pay the way. His subjects, quite naturally, had grown to resent his arrogant quest for glory. The elders of the 12 tribes, whose power had been greatly diminished over the past decades as the nation evolved into a monarchy, had long recognized King Solomon's loss of touch with the people. They had waited patiently for several years, for the right moment to stir the people with the ideas of revolting return to the old tribal system, and now the moment seemed right. The multitudes, burdened as they were with heavy taxes, and disillusioned by the abuses of Solomon's monarchical excesses, receptive. Yes, even ready to entertain this idea. Oh man. How have we come to this? Darius wondered aloud. In the winter of his life, my king has turned away from the wisdom of his youth, and my nation draws closer to collapse each day. The questions and contradictions posed by his king's life had plagued the insightful young man for some time, and as one given to reflection and introspect, Darius had determined to discover the answers as to why his king had fallen. At 35, and the youngest member of the council, Darius had only vague recollections of the glorious spring and summer of Solomon's reign. Yet he knew the history all too well. No man born out of union between man and woman had ever started out with more divine promise and purpose than Solomon, son of David. And yet no man before or since had come to the end of his days with greater sense of dissatisfaction with life, or as many questions as to its ultimate meaning. What separated my king from the source of his wisdom? Darius asked himself as he recounted the king's life. Surely not lack of achievement, for his accomplishments as architect, poet, and judge were unparalleled. Sorry, guys. My nose is a little plugged. Neither could it be for the lack of honor, for his influence, wealth, and stature were unsurpassed. During the first 20 years of his 4-year reign, the praises of Solomon's leadership echoed throughout the world, and emissaries from kingdoms near and far sat at his feet, spellbound, absorbing the discourse of his vast knowledge. From the days of his youth, it was apparent that the spark of the divine had lighted upon Solomon, and that he was to be the great leader who would guide his people to the forefront of the nations. How then could one divinely blessed with leadership skills beyond compare be led away from the very one who gifted him with the greatness? The question continued to haunt him as he approached the west entrance to the palace. Darius presented to the sentry at the gate the royal insignia ring, which permitted his unquestioned access to the inner quarters of the complex. From the sentry station, he was quietly escorted through the outer courtyard to the entrance of the administration wing of the palace. The council's elders had made certain that the night sentries were well compensated, and therefore immune to the bribes of Prince Rehoboam's spies in their thirst for knowledge of the workings of the council. Consequently, the sentry's official report to his supervisor, completed at the end of his 6-hour watch, would read that the night had been uneventful, with nary a visitor to the west gate of the palace. The sentry unlatched the 12-foot tall double doors, which led to the great hall of the administration building, and quickly closed them as Darius entered the foyer. The perimeter of the courtyard was well lighted with the oil-fed torches, and his eyes struggled to adjust to the dimly lit vestibule as the doors shut behind him. He lingered for a moment, acclimating to the darkness, then made his way up the grand stone staircase to the council room on the second floor. Despite his relative youth, Darius had been tapped to join the secret council as a result of his abilities to communicate with the spoken word and the quill. While some of the elders may have initially resented his youth, he had gradually earned their respect and proved that he belonged. He was the sixth member of the group to arrive at the meeting. A quick glance around the room told him that Elder Baruch, Secretary of the Treasury, was the only regular not yet present. He must be preparing for last-minute details for his presentation, Darius reasoned to himself, then immediately dismissed the matter. Besides, Baruch was often arrived late to these sessions. The issues relating to the Treasury were increasingly precarious, and usually last on the Council's agenda. Anxious to discover the purpose of the meeting, Darius and other members dispensed with the usual pleasantries and settled in their respective places. The ornately carved cypress wood conference table was adequately prepared with quill and ink, and as well as fresh parchment and papyrus rolls in anticipation of the directives and edicts which would come forth from the council. General Nebo, the acknowledged leader of the group, wasted no time in bringing the meeting to order. "My friends," he said to Darius and the other members, "the emergency which necessitated this gathering is singular and severe. I shall begin without delay." The general stood at the head of the table and commanded a presence befitting of his position. A warrior first and foremost, he had risen to prominence many decades earlier by his stirring acts of bravery in battle. A fearless fighter who had little use for politics or those who did, he inspired courage by his confidence and the unyielding force of his will. Yet the lines on his face on this night exhibited concern that the others had never seen before. "Gentlemen, as you well know, the treasury of our kingdom is dangerously close to depletion." He cleared his throat and hesitated before continuing. "Regrettably, I must tell you that this crisis was made worse by events of earlier today. By now you notice that the elder Baruch is not with us this evening." The normally unshakable leader of the council motioned to the empty chair to his right and paused to collect his thoughts. "I must sadly inform you that he will not be joining us tonight, or at any time in the future, for earlier this day he was rushed to the Royal Infirmary after collapsing while at work within his office." I didn't know talking was so much work. Okay. General Nebo and Baruch were the two senior members of the group and had forged a strong friendship over their years together in the king's service. The general had received the news of his friend's collapse nearly 6 hours earlier, but it was evident that he was still shaken. "It appears that he will survive, thanks be to God, but there has been damage within his brain. He no longer has the function of his speech, nor the usage of his right side of his body." The other council members sat in silence as the news registered. They had known for some time of Baruch's physical ailment, but this news of his collapse was shocking nonetheless. Baruch was the eldest of the members, and the length of his years had begun to show of late. His mind had remained clear, but the trembling in his hands and the dimming of his eyes had grown progressively worse in recent months. 2 years earlier, he had made the arrangements to return to the village of his youth to live out the remainder of his days. But the leadership crisis in the kingdom dictated that he remain at the treasury. Though at times an obstinate and difficult man, Baruch had a mind for monetary matters like no other. His performance over the past decade, considering the adverse effects of the king's ill-advised withdrawals from the treasury reserves, had been nothing short of miraculous. It will be difficult to replace this man, thought Darius, still digesting the news. General Nebo continued after a moment in silence. "The royal physicians have given us no hope that Baruch will be able to return to his work. Therefore, we must prepare immediately to fill his position. On the surface, it would appear that the logical option would be to elevate one of his secretaries to fulfill the post. In truth, however, the council members knew that this was not a feasible solution. Whilst Baruch's two primary assistants were certainly capable bookkeepers and administrators, they had not been prepared to lead on that scale which was now required. Baruch was a certifiable genius in the matters of finance, but had one glaring weakness. Perhaps from a quirk of personality or a demanding sense of perfection, absolute decision-making authority within his department, including over matters of relative insignificance, had remained securely vested in him. He could not or would not allow his subordinates to handle the difficult yet necessary tasks which would increase their knowledge and train them for roles in leadership. In a less turbulent environment, the young assistants could have nurtured until they were ready, but not now. Immense and immediate changes facing the Treasury would demand a seasoned leader at the helm with ample experience in commerce and finance. The council would have to look outside its ranks to fill the vacancy. The man elected would find the task daunting indeed. The revenue into the royal treasury was substantial during the early years of Solomon's rule, and was promptly invested into the buildings and maintenance of his fortified cities and trade routes throughout the kingdom. A significant portion had been invested as well into the building of the great fleet of royal merchant ships which now sailed from the kingdom's port cities on the Mediterranean. Solomon's treasury soon overflowed with abundance as his burgeoning trade empire generated vast quantities of profits in gold and silver. It was not long, however, before the lavishness of the royal household increased, as did the cumbersome bureaucracy needed to manage it. In more recent years, the great bureaucracy spawned by the king's excesses consumed more and more of the annual receipts, to the point that now the annual expenditures exceeded the income. Against his advisors' objections, the king had authorized the withdrawal of the treasury deposits to be used for ordinary maintenance. As these deposits dwindled year after year, the kingdom got closer and closer to the edge of bankruptcy. Darius had watched its evolution and thought it a sad and perplexing phenomenon. The more gold came in, the more people were required to manage it, which in turn required more gold, which in turn required more people to manage it. Seemingly overnight, Solomon's great empire had evolved into a bloated monster, and that monster now demanded ever-increasing quantities of sustenance on a regular basis. The kingdom's total revenues for the current year had been greatly reduced due to two factors. Each of which hastened the arrival of the fiscal disaster now present. First, under growing threat of revolt by the 10 northern tribes, the council had elected to drastically reduce the onerous tax plan which previously established by the king. Unfortunately, the operating costs of the kingdom did not decline in the same proportion, as Prince Rehoboam had seized control of the administration of the royal household and thus circumvented the council's ability to reduce the expenses. The second and more significant factor which contributed to the treasury's reduced income was the near-constant disruption of the region's trade. In times of peace, the roads which linked the kingdom's coastal ports with the empires of the east remained open and safe for the unfettered transport of goods. In recent years, however, warring bands of nomads had sensed the weakening of King Solomon's leadership, and regularly raided the caravans which traveled on the kingdom's roads. Having suffered heavy losses, the majority of the region's great traders had curtailed their operations and refused to travel their routes for fear of the marauding bands. Though General Nebo had personally pledged sufficient protection, the traders were of no mind to face danger. Consequently, the flow of levies and taxes into the treasury from the caravans had slowed to a trickle. Decisive action was needed, unless the 1 year's supply of gold remained in the nation's coffers. There are few men in all of the kingdom with the necessary expertise in finance to helm the treasury, General Nebo stated as he removed several pieces of papyrus from his leather attaché. And fewer still with the equal amount of experience in matters of trade and commerce. He paused for a moment as the sheet of papyrus was passed on the table to the other members. Truth be known, there's one man whose leadership ability elevated him above all other candidates. Darius' copy of papyrus had barely made its way around to him when Johann, chief clerk of the council, spoke up. What of Prince Rehoboam, who is waiting in the wings for Solomon to pass? He will not be angered by this move. General Nebo immediately dismissed the question. At last, King Solomon was counted among the living and thus still on the throne. Our sworn duty is to him and to our country, not to the heir. We must not allow our decision to be influenced by fear. Darius glanced at the papyrus and saw that it contained one name, Ephraim ben Jared, the great merchant trader of Megiddo. Forgive me, General, Johann persisted, but is this not the same Ephraim ben Jared, whose father served with distinction in the courts of King David and King Solomon? Have you forgotten that he walked away from the position of some status at this very court to pursue a career as the common peddler of goods? Yes, replied Nebo, it would appear that he made the great right choice, didn't he not? Is he not today commonly referred as the greatest merchant trader from the near to the far east? Johann grudgingly conceded the point, but clearly harbored resentment against the success of Ephraim ben Jared. He had supervised ben Jared at the outset of his apprenticeship over 30 years ago, and had tried in vain to dissuade him from leaving the court to seek his fortune in commerce. Ephraim ben Jared's ancestors had served as distinguished scribes for many generations, but his heart did not share the passion for the profession of it as his father's. He chose to walk away from the security of his position in pursuit of his dream, and Johann, a man of logic and reason, simply could not understand such a seemingly foolish quest. Though your memory be correct regarding the facts of Ben Jared's brief tenure at this court, confirmed the general, let us not begrudge the man for pursuing his true calling. As we speak, do not his merchant ships number more than any others, and return to our coastal cities on the Mediterranean from ports abroad with goods of the finest quality? Ugh. This is going to be a lot harder than I thought, and I chose a short book. Does not the great trade empire which bared his emblem stretch from the desert of the Negev to the great river Euphrates? And let us not forget his renown for training others in the noble arts of selling and influence. The ambitious and bright journey to seek his counsel and turn to their regions steeped in principles which bring prosperity. Countless traders, as he mentioned, have become merchants to suppliers, and suppliers to the leaders of their own caravans. His esteem among the people, as well as the undeniable demonstration of his leadership skills, indicate that he is the best choice for the job. Furthermore, his presence at the helm will influence the caravan leaders, many of whom credit their fortunes to his schooling, conquer their fears, and return to their routes. And so the matter was brought to a vote. With 5 of the council members in favor and 1 abstaining, it was decided that Ephraim ben Jared would be the candidate nominated to lead the treasury during the perilous days ahead. It was also determined that Darius would be the cabinet member entrusted to carry the council's invitation to the great merchant traders' complex in Megiddo. Aside from the rumors regarding the immensity of the old man's wealth and the occasional passing comment from his father years ago, Darius knew little of the man behind the stories. Even less did he know that by nightfall 3 days hence, a mysterious set of writings would fall into his hands, and his courage would be tested like never before, if he and its message were to survive. Well, that's a little, I don't know, what's the right word? How about, gosh, I can't think of the right word. That's a little ominous, I guess. I don't know. Foreshadowing. We're gonna go with that. That's some foreshadowing. Okay, anyways, yeah, so I guess I'm going to cheat the system a little bit and just give myself a few hours of watch time, because yeah, I don't know, my voice needs a break, but I can't stop, because I want to do this. So it's just a little wild. Just kind of different, you know? First kind of live stream like this. We'll see what happens. And, yeah, I don't know. Chapter 2. Darius arose the next morning shortly before dawn. Though the council's meeting had lasted well into the wee hours, he was determined to get an early start. For the city of Megiddo was some 70 miles to the north of Jerusalem, and would require a full day's journey by horse and chariot. The urgency of the matter was likewise contributed to his desire to begin at once with his task. The duration of his stay at Megiddo would last for at most 2 days. Where am I? Depending upon the meeting, when a meeting could be arranged with Ephraim ben Jared. Consequently, the personal belongings he packed were few. His leather satchel were his garments. In his leather satchel were his garments, the dossier of Ben Jared, and 2 empty water skins, which he would fill at the spring fed while at the city square en route to the stables. Before leaving, he checked again to make certain he had packed the royal letter addressed to Ben Jared, which requested a meeting. This would be dispatched to the great merchant traders complex upon his arrival in the city of Megiddo. The royal stables were located in the southeast. Royal stables were located in the southeast. The royal stables were located in the southeast corner of Jerusalem, approximately 3/4 of a mile from Darius' quarters at Lower Zion Road. With the fast approaching daylight and commotion of the streets as his allies, Darius' concern regarding Prince Rehoboam's spies was greatly reduced. Thus he made his way along the main street of the commerce in lieu of traveling the narrow side streets. As the sun rose over the eastern part of the city of Jerusalem, Jerusalem was slowly transformed from the sleepiness of the night before a city which teemed with activity. Darius continued toward the stables and observed that the vendors and merchants were already unshuttered their stalls and stops and were setting out their fresh produce, goods, and merchandise in preparation for the day's commerce. One has to rise early to beat these enterprising souls. Darius marveled as he passed through the hive of activity. He'd always been an early riser, yet try as he may, he was not able to remember a time when he had ever started the day earlier than the traders and the merchants on the street. After filling his water skins at the well in the city square, Darius walked across the street to a produce vendor's stall and purchased some cheese, dates, and raisin cakes for the trip. Upon his arrival at the royal stables, Darius discovered that General Nebo's chief lieutenant had arrived before daybreak and arranged a stallion and chariot for the journey. Because the directive had come from the general himself, the stable master asked no questions regarding the nature of the trip, as Darius loaded his personal belongings, the water skins, and a bushel of oats for the horse. The general's lieutenant has requisitioned these items for you as well, the stable master as he handed Darius a large duffel containing a breastplate, and sword, a crossbow with arrows, and a bronze shield. Your chariot carries the seal of the royal guard, and thus it offers a fair amount of protection against the robbers and thieves who dwell among the cliffs. But, he continued, with a hint of concern in his voice, one can never be too prepared. Darius gladly accepted the items. It had been several years since his stint in the Royal Cavalry, yet he felt comfortable knowing that he could use his weaponry if the need arose. After the chariot was loaded and the items secured for travel, the chief stable hand led Darius to the stalls and pointed to a glistening black Arabian stallion. The general's lieutenant has arranged for you one of the finest horses in all the land. He is a spirited beast who answers to the name of Chiron. He runs like the wind and will serve you well. The stable hand haltered the horse and prepared him for the chariot as Darius ran his hand along the sleek mane and marveled at its beauty. Many years prior, King Solomon had imported nearly 3,000 of these beautiful animals from the kingdoms of Egypt and Cilicia, and now the herd numbered over 12,000. Approximately one-third was stabled at Jerusalem, with the remainder spread equally at King Solomon's garrisons throughout the kingdom. These fine horses were a source of pride for all of Israel, and the people cheered when the horses and charioteers passed by in formation during the great festivals. The sun was completely risen now, and Darius made a final glance at his maps before embarking. Barring any unforeseen troubles, I should arrive at the gates of Megiddo within 10 hours. He mentally calculated as he led his horse towards the eastern gate of the walled city. Once outside of Jerusalem, he would head north to the east road for approximately 2 miles as he circled Jerusalem, then west toward the Mediterranean Sea for 25 miles. From there, he would link with the great inland trade route called Via Maria until connecting with the road to Megiddo. His trip would take him from the hills of Jerusalem through heavily forested plain of Sharon and over the Yarkon River. And finally, just prior to reaching Megiddo, he would travel up the mountainous pass that would take him to the southernmost portion of the Carmel Range and down into the city on the other side. Though the trip would take most of the day and would require a consistently brisk pace, he would enjoy the sights and of the diverse and beautiful landscape of the interior of the kingdom. Ooh. Easy there, Chiron, Darius said to his horse as he pulled in the reins over so slightly. The late afternoon sun lingered on the horizon to his left as he crested the southern peaks of Mount Carmel. The horse, like Darius, seemed to sense that they were close to their destination and fought to pick up the gait. Darius brought his horse to a slow walk as they approached a vista on the trail. From his vantage point, he could see the city of the Megiddo in the valley below. Aside from a top at a small village for his midday meal and 2 brief stops along the way to rest and water his horse, he had traveled the entire day. He was dusty, tired, and ready to find a suitable inn at which to refresh himself. "Steady on, old friend," he said to the horse as he headed down the mile-long pass to the city. "We'll have you waddled and carried within the hour." The city of Megiddo had been in existence for centuries, but had only recently come under Jerusalem rule. It was now one of the key trade cities in King Solomon's empire. Because of its strategic location near the Via Maria trade route, the king had invested heavily in the fortification and modernization of the city. Its aqueduct system, garrisons, and massive stone storehouses were as sophisticated as any in the great kingdoms of the East. The road leading to the city stirred with activity in the late afternoon. The main gate would close for the evening in less than 4 hours, and the traders and vendors not connected with the large caravans scurried about in an effort to finish the day's business and retire within the confines of the city. Though Darius knew of Megiddo, this was his first actual visit to the city. He approached the main gate and fell in behind a small trade caravan arriving at the coast. Once inside the gates, Darius headed east on what appeared to be the primary thoroughfare through the city and stopped at the street bazaar of spice and produce vendors to inquire about residents for the night. The proprietor of a small vegetable stand had nearly finished closing his cart when Darius pulled up. "Excuse me, sir," Darius said to the man. "Where might a traveler to your fair city find lodging for himself and his animal?" The man, a jovial Hebrew, took one look at Darius's royal chariot and immediately sized him as to be a man of means. "Such a pity," said the man, shaking his head. "My nephew owns a small inn not 500 paces from here, and could certainly use the profits derived from your patronage." But he lowered his voice and glanced quickly over his shoulder on the unlikely chance that his nephew was listening to the conversation. "His dilapidated building is sorely in need of renovation, and I do not think it would be to your liking." He continued to gaze with admiration on Darius's horse and chariot. "No, you'd be much more suited to dwell at the inn called Tel Gazor. You have an excellent dining facility and a suitable place to stable your fine animal. Oh, and yes," he continued, "the naturally heated springs of Agmaram are but a stone's throw away. It is the most pleasant spot to bathe and refresh after a long journey." Darius graciously thanked him after receiving directions. He smiled to himself as he pulled away and wondered if the enthusiastic man received a commission from the owner of the Tel Gazor Inn. Darius located the inn and pulled his chariot under the portico at the front entrance, where he was immediately met by 2 young men. One secured the halter of his horse, and the other hurried to the back of his chariot and began unloading Darius's belongings. Darius reached into his money purse and gave each a silver coin. He gave an additional coin to the young man in charge of the horse, with instructions to purchase a bundle of carrots to feed the horse after his oats and watering. He made his way to the front reception area of the inn, and after securing a room, asked the proprietor at the desk, "Are you familiar with the great merchant trader who is known as Ephraim ben Jared?" The proprietor, who had been intently focused on his ledger, was at first startled by the question, but beamed with pride as he responded, "Oh yes, sire. I know of him well, for you see, Master ben Jared is my partner in this inn. With this capital and my energy, this humble concern has prospered now for nearly 10 years. He further informed Darius that his inn was just one of many enterprises in the city that Ben Jared had encouraged and nurtured in similar partnership arrangements. Yes, I have heard of his reputation as a builder of wealth, and I am glad to hear of your prosperity," said Darius as he reached into his satchel and removed the royal letter addressed to Ben Jared. "Would you be most kind to have this correspondence delivered to his complex right away?" The proprietor handed the letter to a young clerk seated at his right and whispered instructions in his ear. The clerk took one look at the royal seal and nearly fell over himself as he agreed to handle the matter personally and immediately. A task such as this for the king's emissary would certainly mean a healthy bonus. Darius received a latchkey and was directed to the stairs which led to the second floor and his suite of rooms that overlooked the rear courtyard. Upon entering, he unpacked his garments, then collected his robe and towel, and returned to the lobby to secure directions in the springs of Agmarum. He had been on the road for nearly 11 hours and was ready for a hot bath of steam and some relaxation. Following his return to the room, Darius had requested for approximately 1 hour. Following his return to his room, Darius had rested for approximately 1 hour when he was awakened by a knock at his door. "Yes, who is it?" He rose from his cot and gathered his robe. "Begging your pardon for the interruption, sire. I have a reply to the correspondence which was sent to Ephraim ben Jared." Darius opened the door and was greeted by the clerk from the front desk. "Master ben Jared's servants awaits your response in the lobby, sire," said the young man as he handed Darius a roll of parchment. Darius removed the bronze ring which secured the scroll and read the note. Cool. "My dear sir, thank you for your kind letter. It is not often that one receives correspondence from the King's Council. Accordingly, I would be most honored to meet with you to discuss any matters you deem appropriate. Please accept my invitation to join me this evening for late supper. If this is acceptable, my servant Jailor will escort you to my compound at your convenience. Most sincerely, from Ben Jared." Darius rerolled the note and rewarded the young man with a gold sovereign. "Instruct Ben Jared's servant that I will gladly accept his master's invitation and meet him in the lobby within the half hour." The clerk returned to the first floor as Darius removed a tunic and cloak from the oak wardrobe, quickly reread the dossier within his leather satchel, and prepared himself to meet this man called Ephraim ben Jared, the great merchant trader of Megiddo. I am Jalor, and will escort you to the Chapter 3. "I am Jalor, and will escort you to Master Ben Jared's complex," said the distinguished Samaritan, who greeted Darius as he descended the stairs. "Your horse is no doubt stabled for the night," he continued as they walked through the foyer and into the warm night air. "Therefore we shall journey in my master's carriage. And I shall return you to the inn at your leisure." Under the portico of the sun sat a glistening 4-man chariot, its cedar wood frame intricately carved and stained with the deep red dye derived from the Edom plant. The interior rails were upholstered with the finest Venetian leather, and its exterior was trimmed with hammered bronze. Even General Nebo's personal chariot would look out of place next to this fine ride, thought Darius as he admired the richly appointed carriage. Jalor adroitly maneuvered the two stallions as they pulled the chariot down the boulevard known as Abroad and exited the city via the north gate. From there he turned left on the road which would eventually lead to the part of the city of Haifa on the Mediterranean. Master Ben Jared's complex is approximately 2 miles northwest of here in a small hill overlooking the plains. "We shall be there in no time," he pronounced as he lightly cracked the whip on the stallion on the right. The lights of Megiddo grew dim as Darius made out what appeared to be a small walled city on the summit of the hill directly ahead of them. Many years ago, this complex was occupied by the son of the governor of Damascus and was used as the southernmost outpost for the distribution of the Syrian trade. Geller, following their fall and the subsequent occupation of this region by your people, Master Ephraim purchased the entire compound from King Solomon's district official and has utilized the facilities as the headquarters for his vast trade empire. They made their way up the hill and stopped at the sentry outpost, some 20 paces from the main gate. The two Stuart guards armed with a sword were posted at a small stone shack, while 4 more armed with crossbow patrolled from the top of the 15-foot stone wall which surrounded the compound. Gelor nodded to his fellow Samaritans at the post, and they motioned for him to proceed towards the gate. Within a moment, unseen men from inside the compound rolled aside the large wooden gates. "We are somewhat isolated from the garrison of Megiddo," explained Gelor as he noticed Darius' interest in the security measures. "The goods stored here within my master's compound. Were they to be stolen by those with evil desires, in exchange for gold, would bring a lifetime of wealth to 1,000 men. But," he added with some pride, "this is not likely to happen. My brethren from Samaria are the finest and most loyal guards in the land, and it is our honor and duty to protect Master Ephraim's interests." As they passed through the gate, Darius's attention was immediately drawn to the stunning central garden which served as the focal point of the entire complex, a genuine oasis in the midst of the desert. The garden was enormous, with lush and mature landscaping that was regal in its beauty. Gelor circled the garden for approximately 1/8 of a mile, which ringed it, and halted their chariot at the main entrance. Wow. Okay. We're doing good, though. I'm fine. As they passed through the gate, Darius' attention was immediately drawn to the stunning central garden, which served as the focal point of the entire complex. A genuine oasis in the midst of the desert, the garden was enormous, with lush and mature landscaping that was regal in its beauty. Gelor circled the garden for approximately 1/8 of a mile on the road which ringed it, and halted the chariot at the main entrance. He tied the horses to one of the many posts placed there for the purpose and indicated that Darius was to follow him. The normal entrance to the garden was delineated by a hand-laid stone walkway wide enough for 2 chariots abreast to pass it. The walkway was set between 2 in-ground rectangular stone ponds, which gauged approximately 40 paces in length. Darius admired the stonemason's handwork as he observed the pools and towering pillars which rose out of the water on either side of him. In the center of the walkway was a row of neatly pruned olive trees which provided ample shade for the entire length of the path. Darius's appreciation for the beauty and design of the garden was apparent to Gelor as they walked along. At its end, the walkway opened to the upper rear terrace of the small open-air amphitheater. Darius and Gelor stood near the steps at the rim of the half-bowl-shaped facility and peered downward. From their point at the top of the sloped, at the top of the land, sloped steeply away from them to reveal a stone staging area and a lectern at the bottom. Darius counted 3 terraced ledges which had been cut into the grass hillside, each with a row of limestone benches upon it, which to sit. Much too small to accommodate the minstrel shows which roamed the countryside, the facility was closer to the size to the grand lecture room within the palace at Jerusalem. By Darius' estimation, it appeared capable of comfortably seating 50 to 60 people. Darius had seen drawings of Babylon's great Calidrome arena, at which the multitudes would gather to hear the popular orators of the day, and was struck by the familiarity of this miniature version of this facility. He looked at Jalor with genuine curiosity as to why a replica of the Great Theater would be located here. Within Ephraim the Ad Jarrett's compound, Jalor sensed his puzzlement and explained. Though having never sought it, Master Ephraim has gained much notoriety through the years for his teachings and orations. Surely his renown has reached Jerusalem as well. Darius nodded. I shall tell you the story of how it began, said Jalor. Several years ago, long after his reputation as a great merchant trader had been firmly established, a handful of his struggling vendors requested that he share with them the knowledge which had caused him to prosper. Honored to have been asked, he willingly obliged to their sincere request and began to counsel them in the methods and principles which had led to his prominence. As their application of these truths dramatically improved their fortunes, others took notice and likewise sought the counsel of his master Ephraim. From what was birthed as an informal tutoring session for a few young vendors has grown into a thrice annual assemblage of would-be leaders from far and wide. This amphitheater was built to accommodate the increasing number of attendees. Are all of whom attend employed within the bounds of his trade empire? Inquired Darius. No, replied Jalor, and thus proves the truth of his teachings, for it seems that the more that Master Ephraim has shared, even with those from whom he will receive no direct benefit from their prosperity, the greater his enterprise and esteem have grown. Oh, okay. I don't know, this kind of sucks. Like, the book is interesting. Oh, my throat is getting so sore. Oh. Okay. The two men remained for a moment at the top of the terrace, then retraced their steps through the garden and returned to the horses which awaited them. Continuing on the road, which circled the garden, Jalor directed the chariot down a narrow arterial street which led to a two-story stone building at the southeast section of the compound. Because of its design, the fine detailing of the masonry work, and the manicured landscaping surrounding it, Darius assumed this structure to be the main residence facility. Its size, though, was massive and comparable to the stately administration building in the royal city. Aside from the king's palace, he had seen nothing in his travels even remotely approaching its grandeur. Jalor halted the chariot on the crushing stone circular drive in front of the mansion and motioned to the entrance. It has been my pleasure to serve you, sire. If you will kindly proceed to the residence, my brother Jabul will greet you. Darius thanked the conscientious driver and proceeded up the stepped stone walkway to the main entrance. As promised, Darius was immediately met by Jabul, an equally distinguished Samaritan. Won't you come in, sire? We have been expecting you. He bowed at the waist and extended his right hand toward the foyer. Master Ephraim will be detained momentarily, but has asked I show you to the great room. May I offer you a cool drink to refresh your thirst? Yes, that would be most appreciated, said Darius. Jabul snapped his fingers twice, and within seconds a servant appeared with a tray of refreshments. With the servant following behind, Jabul led Darius across the polished stone floor of the foyer and down 3 steps of the atrium-like great room. From the bronze-framed paintings to the intricate detail work of the moldings and trim, to the delicate ivory carvings and the porcelain vases showcased within the niches of the plastered walls, the room was a picture of understated elegance. Darius marveled at the sheer beauty surrounding him. The oil-fed sconces which adorned the walls and provided a soft ambient light appeared to be made of solid gold. The rugs from Persia upon the marble floor and the beautifully upholstered sofas and lounges were of royal quality. To the left of the dressed stone fireplace in the corner along the west wall stood a solitary 60-string harp in its stand, with 5 giant palm trees lining the south-facing wall, reaching for the 30-foot high ceilings. The room was enormous in size, and yet because of the grouping of the tasteful and exquisite furniture, it could equally accommodate a gathering of 100 or an intimate evening of 2. This was indeed an impressive estate. Jabul motioned for the servant to set the tray on one of the limestone pedestals, where he poured a goblet of the beverage and offered it to Darius. This is my favorite drink of my people, said Jabul. made from the juice of the papaya, banana, and orange. It is most refreshing. Judging by his refined manners, impeccable dress, and the deference extended to him by the other servant, Darius surmised that Jabul was the man who directed the entire household. Master Ephraim should arrive in a few moments. Please be comfortable. He then ascended the 3 steps which led to the foyer and departed from the room. Darius enjoyed his beverage as he admired the large oil painting on the canvas hung above the fireplace. Having spent a summer of his adolescence in the coastal city of Jaffa, he recognized this scene at once. It was of the harbor of the great city at sunset and was painted from the perspective of a ship anchored from 500 yards off the coast. As his mind recalled memories of days gone by, he heard a muffled cough and a distinguished voice behind him. "I'd love to visit the sea. It is a most invigorating environment. Do you not agree?" said the voice. Darius turned and saw an elderly man who appeared to be in his early to mid-60s. He was a man of a slightly below average height and whose skin was tanned and weathered from years in the desert sun. Darius noticed nothing remarkable about the man's physical appearance except for 2 things. His eyes twinkled with life, and his smile conveyed warmth and sincerity. "I am Ephraim Ben Jared, and it is my pleasure to have you in my home," said the elderly man as he extended his hand to his guest. Though lacking in stature and chiseled features often associated with charismatic leaders, he radiated confidence, yet carried himself with an air of humility. Darius liked him immediately. After a few moments of polite conversation, Jabul entered from the west hall. "Excuse me, sir, dinner will be served in 1/2 hour. "Good," said Ephraim. This will allow just enough time for me to show our esteemed guests the inner workings of our operation." And with that, he led Darius out of the main entrance of the mansion and across the crushed stone drive to a covered walkway which led to the vast distribution center. As they strolled through the various storehouses, Darius calculated that at least 80 workers scurried about unloading and sorting the beauty from a train of cargo wagons. "We are not usually working this late into the evening," said Ephraim, "but this very afternoon a caravan load of goods arrived from our ships at the point of Haifa. The workers you see are preparing the merchandise for distribution on the morrow to our emporiums and caravan leaders throughout the kingdom." As the tour continued, Ephraim stopped periodically to inspect the new merchandise or to chat with one of the workers. Darius marveled that his host seemed to know each of the dock hands by name. The workers in turn responded to their leader with genuine fondness and respect. Oh, goodness. Okay. Oh, wow. I got this. Darius certainly noted how this contrasted with the environment he had witnessed at the royal storehouses in Jerusalem. No matter how much the supervisors threatened or cajoled and reprimanded, the workers at the royal dock seemed to do only the barest minimum to avoid punishment. "I notice that your workers appear contented in their labors and go about their tasks without constant prodding from their supervisors," said Darius to his host as he relayed the stories of the work environment in Jerusalem. "I cannot believe that the workers of Megiddo are of a different constitution than the workers of my city. To what do you owe the striking difference in spirit?" The elderly man smiled as he molded the question. "Over the years, through many failings in my efforts to inspire, I have learned a few important truths. First, people will give their best if only when they are encouraged and rewarded for a task well done. If the only reward they receive is a whip on their back when their labors fall short, they will learn to do only that amount of work which will keep the whip from their back, and no more. And second," said Ephraim as he picked up a bolt of purple fabric from an open bundle, "a leader will only secure commitment to his cause only when he places the success of his people ahead of his own. Neither riches nor respect will affix to his name unless he labors with the goal that his people prosper first. Sadly, I was slow to comprehend this most basic of laws," continued Ephraim, as he returned the bolt of fabric to its bin. "At the outset of my adventure into commerce, I was driven by a zeal to fulfill my coffers with gold, and I foolishly demanded my workers to labor with this as our common goal. I soon discovered that my selfish dreams did nothing to inspire them, and their work would stop promptly at the end of each shift, or worse, would halt completely if I left the building. It was also with the traders I commissioned to make my goods. Also was it so with the traders I commissioned to market my goods. Though my passion for prosperity pushed me to excel, I was not able to infuse the same spirit within their hearts. To my discouragement and dismay, my words of persuasion rang empty, and my appeals for increased productivity landed upon deaf ears. It is difficult to fathom such a scenario, replied Darius, for the workers I see before me attend to their tasks with an obvious sense of pride, and the traders who market your goods are esteemed as the most prosperous in the land. How are you able to secure such a change? Ephraim hesitated for a moment and looked over the work area. Allow me to answer by giving the illustration of Bilar, the leader of my caravans from the south. He motioned to the middle-aged man who was counting the bales of linen being loaded onto one of the smaller wagons. Many years ago, Bilar had a young son who demonstrated much promise in his studies. This was a source of great pride for Bilar, and he desired to give his son all the help his own father had been unable to give him. Unfortunately, as the modest compensation as a deckhand, Bilar was unable to pay for the necessary tutoring which would allow his son to progress. He came to me seeking the funds to finance a dream which he harbored, but as my business was still in the early years and the profits were slim, I was unable to offer him an increase in wage. Nonetheless, I was moved by his desire and sought to find a way to assist in its fulfillment. And as is often the case, said Ephraim, his eyes suddenly sparkled as he related the fond memory. An opportunity arrived when we began to seek it. Then, as now, the large bales of cargo shipped to our warehouse, which was securely bound in rope. Because the bales would be opened and sorted into smaller lots for distribution, we had no usage for this rope and simply discarded it as waste. I immediately summoned Belair to my office and explained the situation with the wasted rope. I encouraged him to discover a usage for the rope and suggested that he market it to a willing buyer at the price of his choosing. Any profits derived from his endeavor would be shared equally between us. He was quite intrigued by this arrangement and set out for that very evening to make it work. Within 2 days, said Ephraim, he stopped by my office with a smile as large as the half moon itself, and proceeded to tell me the reason behind his delight. Sire, you will never guess what has happened. Bilar said to me as he beamed with satisfaction. My cousin, who is in the employ of Cabo, the tent maker, has mentioned to me that his boss was dissatisfied with the supply of twine used to bundle the tent stakes and the poles he offers for sale. Sensing an opportunity, I immediately rushed home and cut 2 foot lengths of our rope as samples to show Master Cabo. He was pleased with the quality of the rope as well as my price, and has agreed to purchase all that I can secure for you. Here's your share of the profits from my first sale, he said as he proudly handed me a few coins of silver. He could have handed me a sack of gold, and my joy from receiving it would have paled to the satisfaction I received from sharing in his success, he said, smiling for Ephraim. From that moment, my thinking was transformed. He then said softly, for when I focused on my people instead of my profits, my business and stature began to grow. Today, fully 2/3 of my income is distributed to the very people who labor to generate it, each according to his level of effort. If, as you say, my people embrace their tasks with great pride, it can be for 2 reasons. First, they know that they will share abundantly in the gold which is generated by their labors. But second, and more importantly, he said with obvious conviction, I neither push them nor prod them to labor for me. If I goad them, it is only in the direction of their dreams. For when they have prospered, so too shall I. As they made their way down back the main residence, one sentence uttered by the elderly man lingered in Darius's mind. When I focused on my people instead of my profits, my business and stature began to grow. In the silence of the brief walk, it occurred to Darius that the rumors he heard were true. Ephraim bin Jared was indeed a man of significant wisdom. Let us enter through the kitchen, said Ephraim, with a mischievous grin as he led his guests across the side courtyard. I like to surprise the cooks. From there, he escorted Darius to an enclosed atrium that connected to the culinary wing of the mansion via a set of double doors. The aroma emanating from the kitchen was a heavy mixture of turmeric and garlic, with a hint of lemon and butter. My chef, Mahedi, is from the land of Genghis and is a master with the spices of his native country. I trust that his dishes will be to your liking. After washing at the basin situated in alcove off the kitchen. Ephraim and Darius were seated at the large algum wood table in the great dining hall. Darius surveyed the naan bread with dipping sauces, the seasoned rice dishes, the grilled meats, and other assorted delicacies laid out before him. The hunger in his stomach reminded him that he had not eaten since his midday meal, some 9 hours earlier. Following a brief yet sincere prayer of thanksgiving by Ephraim, the two began to partake of the feast in front of them. Within moments, Ephraim inquired of his friends and acquaintances that remained in the king's service. As best as he could, Darius informed the host of the comings and goings of the elder scribes and clerks, and attempted to fill in the gaps caused by the 30-year period since Ephraim's days as a young apprentice in the royal court. It seems but yesterday I was studying under Mabaro, the great teacher of scribes, Ephraim said whisperly. How my life would have been different had I remained in Jerusalem. It seems but yes. Ooh. After a moment of quiet reflection, Ephraim had directed the conversation to the matters at hand. You have journeyed far to visit me, and I trust it was not for the purpose of having your ears tickled by the stories and recollections of an old scribe. Tell me, why have you honored me with your visit? Darius paused as he folded his linen napkin and placed it on the table beside his cup. As you are certainly aware, sire, he began, a leadership crisis of the severest magnitude threatens to destroy our nation. Our King Solomon lay upon his deathbed, and the entire kingdom teeters at the precipice of the danger. The actions taken in the days to come could well have repercussions for generations to follow. For the next quarter hour, Darius explained in great detail the fear and trepidation surrounding the king's heir, the danger of the revolution by the northern tribes, and finally the debilitating illness of Baruch, the head of the secretary. And so, Darius concluded, it is the latter problem which has necessitated my visit to you this evening. The situation at the treasury is extreme and it requires immediate attention. Because of your expertise in the areas of finance and commerce, the Royal Council has determined that you are the best qualified candidate to lead it through the difficult time. We hope that you will give the matter serious consideration. Who am I that such an invitation should be extended? Ephraim replied after a moment of silence. I am but a humble man of trade who has risen to prominence only to be by the blessing of the Almighty. He clearly was overwhelmed by the invitation. I am completely unworthy of such a position, but if the King's Council has faith in me, then I would be most honored and willing to give my faith all in service to our nation. Darius and the other council members had anticipated an affirmative response, and they prepared an abundance of financial reports for Ephraim to pour over before his arrival at the treasury. We had hoped that you might arrive to your new post in Jerusalem within the fortnight. Will this be possible? Asked Darius as he handed the materials to his elderly host. Ephraim accepted the leather-bound collection of reports and smiled. That will be ample time to prepare my affairs. I learned long ago the importance of picking capable leaders, empowering them to make decisions, and then staying out of their way. He chuckled as he continued. In fact, my enterprise seems to be doing better when I am not interfering in the day-to-day operations. As the meal came to a close and the servants gathered the plates and bowls, Darius, cognizant of the lateness of the hour, said to his host, "You have been most kind to allow me to dine at your table, Ephraim ben Jared. I am honored to have been invited into your home." He smiled warmly to his host as they rose from the table and grasped hands. Though the days ahead promised peril and uncertainty, Darius looked forward to working closely with his new friend and elder mentor. Our time together has been most pleasant, he continued, but regrettably, it is late, and I have stayed much longer than I had planned. He gathered his cloak and satchel and returned to his room at the inn. The lateness of hour is of no concern to me, replied Ephraim, but sadly it is also the hour when robbers, like the possum, crawl from behind the rocks and roam the roads. With your permission, I will send my capable servants, Zalor and Jabul, to the inn to gather your belongings so that you might dwell here for the evening, within the safety of my compound. Besides, our conversation has stirred my memories and has kindled within me the desire to share them. My servants have suffered the ramblings of this old man 100 times. No doubt I would be most honored if you would agree to stay. Disappointed not in the least to be touched by his host's sincere hospitality, Darius accepted the offer, and they adjourned to the landscape inner courtyard. The elderly man clapped his hands, and within moments, Mahdi, the chef, arrived with a plate of sweet cakes and a pot of tea. I know that too much of the baker's confections render my garments too small, chuckled Ephraim, but at my age, who cares? Turning to his servant, he instructed him to send Jalor and Jabul to the inn to gather Darius's belongings and have them placed in the guest suite in the east wing of the compound. Oh, and most importantly, he winked towards Darius as he called out to the departing servants. No matter how loudly I clap, do not bring another plate of those sweets. For nearly half an hour, the two men sat silently in the leather-strapped chairs by the stone fountain and enjoyed their tea and cakes in the pleasant ambience of the summer night. A gentle breeze stirred the air as the water from the fountain provided a soothing underscore to the setting. After finishing their cakes, Darius was the first to speak. You are from a long line of distinguished scribes, Ephraim. Tell me, how is it that you left your position of your fathers and became a leader of such great influence in the area of trade? A slight smile crossed the elderly man's face as he pondered the question. For a moment he did nothing but reflect. With faraway longing in his voice, he began to reminisce. I was but a young man, employed by my father in the King Solomon's court, he said softly, and I was easily and foolishly impressed by the trappings of wealth and status which surrounded me. I observed the most prosperous leaders of our land and how the people catered to their every whim and want, and I perceived their wealth influences power, and decided that I, too, would rise to such heights for the spoils it would bring. He paused as if the naivety of his youth embarrassed him still. Thanks be to God, my father recognized the misdirection of my desire and gently guided me to the proper course. To grow in stature as well as in purse, he admonished me, you must never seek to exalt yourself. Rather, seek only to serve. For it is only in your service of others will you be elevated to the position of influence, honor, and wealth. A comfortable presence settled in among them as this wind rustled the palm fronds overhead. Darius found himself captivated by the soft-spoken yet powerful words of the elder man and the memories from his youth-filled mind. For the blink of an eye, he was 12 and sitting at his father's knee. Oh, what I would give to relive just one of those moments, Darius thought to himself as he listened to the great man before him recount the journey of his life. Whew. We are now on chapter 5. Oh, goodness. Here's the thing. I just didn't anticipate my throat to hurt as much as it does. Like, that's just the hardest part. It's not the reading that's too bad. Like, I'm enjoying the book. It's just my throat gets sore. Anyways, chapter 5. The whole of Jerusalem was abuzz with the charisma of the new young monarch. King Solomon was but a young man of 23 and had been on the throne barely 1,000 days. Yet already the people of his kingdom sensed the promise of greatness which radiated from him. Although Solomon's father, the great warrior David, had secured the borders of Israel and brought the 12 factious tribes together as one, it was widely perceived that Solomon would be the sovereign who would transform the fledgling Lason into a bona fide empire of prominence and wealth. Among the young king's many talents was his proficiency as an architect. His grand designs for the soon-to-be constructed temple had energized the people and given them a sense of unity not seen since the days of Moses. And the exodus from Egypt. The future for the young nation of Israel was promising, and the people discerned it. Ephraim ben Jared had placed his quill in the holder on his desk and rubbed his eyes as he stood for a moment to stretch. It was nearly 4 in the afternoon, and he had just completed transcribing the 11th of 12 copies of a relatively minor royal edict, which would be delivered to the provincial governors. With any luck, I will have this assignment finished in 2 hours, then I will speak with father, he promised himself as he removed a fresh piece of papyrus and began the laborious process of transcribing letter for letter the 12th and final copy from the original. Ephraim was an ambitious young man with a mind as keen for strategies as for letters and figures, and his superiors routinely commented on his skills. Yet, though he pushed himself to excel in his work, something was lacking. The challenge of being a scribe was fading, and his instincts told him that his real talents remained hidden and untested. From the small window above his desk on the second floor of the king's administration building, Ephraim observed the hum of construction activity occurring throughout Jerusalem. For the past 2.5 years, he had monitored with great interest the expansion of the city as well as the massive excavation underway in preparation for the building of the great temple. Like all of Jerusalem, Ephraim shared a sense of pride at the prosperity and progress, yet a feeling of personal dissatisfaction increasingly dominated his thoughts. Builders and traders less than my age are becoming richer by the day, while I toil in trivialities at this closet of an office. He struggled to focus his mind on the work ahead, and he was daydreaming, as he daydreamed of wealth and notoriety for himself. Soon I will join their ranks. Ephraim's father, Jared, of the tribe of Levi, had been a key scribe in the King David's court, and had played an important role in the transition of King David's administration to the new King Solomon. Now, as the royal secretary of King Solomon's court, he was a man of prominence in Jerusalem, and like any father in a similar situation, sought to secure a position of status for his son. Father has sacrificed greatly for me to be here. He will not take this news well, Ephraim thought to himself. He still unsure how he would explain the decision, which was certain to disappoint the one man he admired most. Ephraim ben Jared was the eldest son of Jared and his wife, Hannah, and from the time of his birth it was expected that he would become a scribe like his father, and his father before him. His people had always placed great significance on the value of written word, and his family lineage boasted of continuous succession of tribes dating to the time of Moses, when the only means of recording was to transcribe the letters in wet clay tablets. For the elder son like Ephraim, it was unthinkable to pursue any profession other than the one of his ancestors. Further complicating the matters was the fact that Ephraim shared the same month of birth with the new king, and had, due to his father's prominence in the new court, spent his early years as a child playmate of the young Solomon. For the duration of his young life, Ephraim ben Jared had been groomed for position in the royal court, yet now was on the verge of discarding it all to follow a different course. He did not expect his father, or anyone else, for that matter, to understand his decision. But the plans for his life did not include a career as a scribe. Ephraim applied the finishing touches to the 12th and final copy of the royal correspondence and waved it in the air before placing it in the wooden rack on his desk to dry. As he straightened his work area and gathered his thoughts in preparation for the meeting with his father, a sudden surge of intimidation engulfed him as the reality of the moment sank in. The decision he had made with certainty not 24 hours earlier now seemed questionable. He timidly climbed the half-flight of stairs which led to the executive floor. As he made his way down the long corridor and approached the reception area of his father's office, he noticed that a solitary figure labored on an unseen document in the soft glow of candlelight. He immediately recognized the elderly man and smiled as he approached the desk. "Good evening, Obed," said Ephraim to his father's loyal chief assistant. "Once again, the day has slipped away, and you remain at your post. Do you not tire of your labors?" Ephraim playfully chided at his father's elderly aide. "Ah, but a man's work is labor only if he does not enjoy it," said Obed. "I was most fortunate as a young man to stumble upon a profession that brings me a sense of accomplishment and happiness. A man's life will most certainly be blessed if he spends his days in a vocation that he loves. I have, and I count it as a success." They chatted for a moment, and then Obed passed along the message from Ephraim's father. "Master Jared is in consultation with the king, but should arrive at any moment. He has asked that you forgive his tardiness and kindly await for his arrival." Obed escorted Ephraim to his father's outer office. The elderly assistant then closed the mahogany double doors and returned to his desk in the reception area. Ephraim paced nervously as he waited in the richly decorated room and considered dropping the matter entirely. Any guest to the suite of offices would observe at once that his father Jared was a man of great influence in Solomon's court, and thus all of the kingdom. Standing in this room, Ephraim was reminded due to his pedigree, education, and training, that he himself might someday occupy this very office, were he to continue the journey of the scribe. Have you gone mad? Bellowed the practical voice of reason in his head. This will someday be yours, and now you wish to throw it away to chase some foolhardy venture? Ephraim struggled to control the fear and doubt which rendered him nearly immobile. No, I must not allow myself to be tempted by the security and status which would accompany a position in the court, he told himself. This is not my calling. Ooh. This is how you do it. Alright. While conflicting thoughts of reason and desire, to the one other person who's watching, like, how's it going? I hope you're having a great day. While the conflicting thoughts of reason and desire continue their battle in his mind, he continued. He turned to his left, and as he heard the unlatching and opening of a door, "Greetings, my son," the distinguished elder scribe known as Jared said warmly as he entered from the side door which connected to the king's private office. This is, "Please forgive my tardiness. Our king requires my counsel earlier this afternoon, and the matter consumed more time than anticipated. Let us retire to my office where we might discuss what is on your mind." Ephraim and his father clasped hands and warmly embraced in the customary greeting. Though at times challenged by the typical father-son battle of wills, the bond was strong, and Ephraim was thankful that the mutual affection and respect passed between them. They entered his father's office, which was seated at the upholstered chairs by the large window which framed a magnificent view of the city below. After several moments of awkward and insignificant conversation, Jared raised his hand and halted their chat. "My son, I can sense that you are troubled. Tell me, what is your source of turmoil?" Ephraim lifted his gaze from the floor and took a deep breath. "Father, surely you see that our city is prospering all around us. Great fortunes are being created virtually every day, and I feel as though the opportunities of this life are passing me by." He stammered to get the words out. I want to participate in the prosperity and become a man of influence." Jared, the elder, listened with curious interest as his son paused to calm himself. "I am sorry, father," said Ephraim, "but I am not content to transcribe the events of others. My heart's desire is to be one of those who influences the event, not one who merely records it after the effect." He had practiced this speech many times over the past day, yet was disappointed at the little amount of conviction in his voice conveyed as they parted from his mouth. Jared sat quietly for moments as he absorbed the concerning words. Finally he responded, "I find your words puzzling, my son. From the days of your primary schooling, you have shown great aptitude for the ways of the scribe. Because of this, I, at great cost, have secured your tutelage under the master scribe Mabaro. You are a bright young man with a promising future in the court, and yet you say you do not wish to follow the profession that I and my father before me have found so rewarding." "Yes, that is correct," Ephraim replied meekly. The doubt regarding his decision was suddenly magnified by the carefully reasoning words of his father. "How is it that I have failed you, that you wish to depart from the path which has been prepared for you?" "Oh, father, you have not failed me," Ephraim replied immediately, somewhat taken aback. He had anticipated disappointment, but not the level of hurt which radiated his father's voice. "You have given me great opportunity and have imparted significant wisdom into my life. Were I the wealthiest man in the world, I would never be able to repay all that you have done for me. But," he continued somberly, "I do not share your enthusiasm for the profession of the scribe. My interests lie elsewhere. And what is the path you desire to follow, my son?" Young Ephraim hesitated and then quietly said, "I wish to become a leader in commerce and trade and accumulate great wealth." He feared that his answer would greatly disappoint his father, who had pursued public service over material riches. For a moment his father said nothing as he pondered the response from his son. "And why do you wish to accumulate riches?" he finally said. Ephraim's eyes brightened and explained, "I see how those with gold, title, and position are given prominence in our society. I watch the leaders of our people in the market, and I know how the masses bow to them and treat them with respect. His enthusiasm was tempered with a touch of youthful anxiety as he continued, "Father, I am most thankful for my position as a scribe, but I fear that if I continue my present path, I will toil the length of my days in obscurity, and will never allow me to platform. It will never allow me to platform, nor the opportunity to be a man of influence and importance among our people." Jared rose from his seat and walked to the large window to his left. For several moments he did nothing but peer at the city below. Deep in thought, he returned to his seat before speaking. "My son, genuine influence and respect and admiration come from one's character and should never be predicated upon one's gold or title or position. If the whole of a man's influence is based upon these temporal things, what would happen if they were taken away?" Ephraim looked at his father quizzically, unsure where the question was leading. "Allow me to explain," Jared continued. "Do you remember Ibrahim, the state constable of our city? Did he not have a position of influence as well as gold in his purse?" "Yes, father," Ephraim acknowledged. "And the people did indeed bow to him at the city square when he passed by, did they not?" Again, Ephraim nodded his head in agreement. "But I ask you," his father continued, "what happened to his respect following his removal from the office which he held?" His father proceeded before Ephraim was able to comment. "I shall tell you. His so-called respect evaporated like a droplet of water in the desert sand. His subordinates deserted him, and he eventually died a lonely and bitter man. Do you know why? Because he abused the authority and influence which accompanied his office. The people did not respect nor admire him. They bowed to him out of fear, only in fear and intimidation. When the end of his days came upon him and his identity was separated from his position, the people had no longer reason to bow to him." Jared continued with his explanation. "Consider also the example of Damazan, the master engineer and builder of walls in our city. He was a man of immense wealth and was given the seat of prominence at the assembly because of his lavish and public offerings. But how did his workers and those with whom he dealt business consider him? Certainly they offered him a measure of respect, but they did so grudgingly, and only because his gold was the source of their livelihood. In truth, he was a selfish and egotistical man, with no regard for his people. Were it not for his gold, he would have had few friends and even less loyalty from his subordinates." Ephraim cleared his throat as if to comment, but astutely decided against it as his father proceeded. "No, my son, genuine influence and respect are not related to the size of one's purse or the title upon their door. Rather, they come from within. As said Jared as he lightly tapped his index finger over his heart. As proof of this, I ask you to reflect on the story of Alzabar." Ephraim smiled at the mention of the late teacher who had instructed him during the last few years of his adolescence. His esteemed teacher had now been gone for nearly 5 years, but the mere mention of his name brought back many fond memories. Your teacher Alzabar had little in the way of gold, rarely spoke at assembly or in public forum, and was never bestowed with the official title, and yet the people of our city revered his ways and spoke highly of him. Can you tell me why? Once again, Jared did not wait for a response. "The answer is simple, my son. He sought to build others and never himself. His first concern was to those whom he led and routinely gave of his time and funds to help the needy of our city. Because of his quiet example, others were inspired to join the causes for which he labored, and today the orphanage which stands on the lower Fountain Street is the lasting tribute of his influence." He did not seek the praises of men nor desire accolades, and yet there were few among us who were more regarded or more highly esteemed. He walked humbly, and his words were few, but they carried abundant weight. My son, take heed and observe how the lessons of your late teacher's life contrasts with the hordes of would-be teachers who spend their days convincing others of their importance, and who struggle and labor to exalt themselves in their causes. At the end of the day, they have nothing to show for their efforts except a reputation for self-promotion. They are so focused on self that they are unable to see the needs and concerns of the very people they profess to help. This is an interesting phenomenon, is it not? Said Jared, as he leaned forward in his chair. If you seek honor and respect, you will not find it, for a leader is powerless to elevate himself. It is only when you serve others without regard for self will honor, respect, and lasting success be found. His son listened intently. As his son listened intently, Jared leaned back in his chair and paused, pleased that his words had begun to sink in. My son, he then continued, I am not able to impede your choices, nor will I wish to, though I am disappointed that you do not find the life of a scribe to your liking. I do not begrudge your desires to succeed as a merchant trader. On the Contrary, I applaud your ambition and would that you become the greatest of them all. He then concluded his impromptu lesson with a final illustration. It is fine for a man to have a position of influence and the trappings of wealth. I applaud. He said as he gestured towards the lavish decorations of it within his impressive office, and then waved them off as if insignificant. But they are not to be sought as the primary goal. They should merely be the byproducts of this level of service we render. Thus, as you go forth from this day, I ask only that your desire to rise as a leader be motivated by your desire to serve. Ephraim sat in respectful silence, assimilating all that he had heard. From the days of his youth, he had marveled at his father's words, that his father's words had always spoken wisdom and truth. After a moment of quiet contemplation, he bid his father good night. Excited by the administration exited the administration building via the south doors and made his way to his quarters. The theme of his father's teachings continued to ring in his ears as he could walk the cobblestone streets in the golden twilight of dusk. Only when I serve others without regard for myself will honor, respect, and lasting success be found. Okay, wow. I'm 59 pages in to a 179 page book. So I'm a little under a third of the way done. And I've been streaming for the last hour and a half, so I should be done in about 3.5 hours. Oh gosh. This is a lot harder than I realized. Oh. Okay, well. Yeah. I guess I just don't know what to say. But, I said I would do this, so I guess I'd better keep reading. Okay, chapter 6. Ephraim stood at the center of the small warehouse he had leased and surveyed the bales, crates, and bundles of unsold merchandise which lined the walls. Discouraged, he made his way to the rear doors, fastened them, and prepared to retire to his home for the evening. Another day had come and gone, and his till registered but a few copper coins for the effort. Nearly 9 months had passed since he left his position at the royal court, and he had little to show for the labor of his days. What prompted me to undertake such a foolish venture, he thought, in disgust. I am trained in the humble ways of the scribe, not in the confident manner of the trader. Of leadership or persuasion I know nothing. Who am I to inspire anyone to labor by my side? The questions haunted him as he replayed in his mind the events that had brought him to this point. The young scribes and clerks at court were incredulous at his decision to leave. If anyone in the group had been a surefire bet to catapult to the king's inner circle, it was Ephraim. His father's prominence, his first-rate education, and his proficiency with the quill indicated that he was indeed bound for a career of subsistence. But now, by his own choice, it was gone, along with much of his life savings, most of his hope, and all of his confidence. In his exuberance to begin his journey to wealth and acclaim, Ephraim had failed to take the appropriate amount of time to review the entire lot of goods he had committed to the purchase. Only too late did he discover that the rugs were threadbare, the sandals that had not a matching twin, the garments and tapestries had been eaten through by the weevil, and the pottery was cracked or broken. These were the items upon which he planned to build the foundation of his great wealth, but in truth would be lucky to return 1/10 of his capital outlay. Likewise, he had underestimated the ability to retain the vendors which had made up the selling force of his trade route. With the ink not yet dry on his agreement with the previous owner, the 8 seasoned traders on whom he had counted to market his goods marched into his office and demanded the lion's share of all the future profits. When Ephraim explained the impossibility of such a demand, the group banded together to form a competitive concern, and one by one proceeded to pilfer the customers whose patronage was to provide his income. In the immediate weeks following the departure of his traders, Ephraim had tried without success to commission others in their place, but they, young, old, ambitious, or otherwise. Be they young, old, ambitious, or otherwise, he had welcomed many prospective vendors into his fold, but many quickly departed upon discovering his less than inspiring competence in matters of business. In truth, he could hardly blame them, for not even rats remain on a sinking ship. He concluded for the last of the new traders left for the more prosperous environs. His most humiliating defeat cost him dearly in pride and product, and came at the hand of a passer-by filled with promises and optimistic projections en route to the coast. Against his better judgment, yet desperate to record an entry of sales into his empty ledger, Ephraim agreed to co-sign a wagon load of his best goods to the passing vendor. The deadline for the payment was now 3 moons past, and he knew in his heart that neither the vendor nor his merchandise would ever be seen again. Deceived, deserted, and nearing financial ruin, he pondered his dilemma and deeply regretted his plunge into commerce. In an effort to busy himself, Ephraim had sorted and inventoried the goods within his warehouse numerous times over the past several months, each time arriving at the same sad conclusion. While the small inventory of spices were of value, most of the goods were either used or obsolete, and but 1 in 3 items had any marketable worth. As the value of his investment dwindled by the day, and with few customers to occupy his time, Ephraim had ample time to reflect on his decision. The grand plans and visions of his life, which had inspired him to leave the security he had known, were replaced with misgivings and second-guessing. In my rush to acquire riches, I have committed an act of pure folly, he dejectedly thought. How could I have been so foolish? Ephraim struggled to banish the demons of doubt, but to no avail. Maybe my friends were right. What do you know of business, or of selling, or of motivating and influencing others? You'll be back, they exclaimed. The remarks of his peers seemed cutting and belittling at the time, but now he had begun to think they were true. After securing the position, he had made his way toward his dwelling and considered his options, but was forced to admit they were few. He had invested nearly all of his available funds in the purchasing of the goods on the assumption that the future sales would cover his expenses, overhead, and profit. But this had not occurred, and the pool of his remaining capital had all but dried up. Failure was inevitable and close by, and he knew it. Ephraim searched for his mind for an idea that could allow him to salvage his investment. Maybe I could speak with the traders who had arranged the sale between my previous owner and me. It's possible they might be interested in buying the goods. He walked along. The particular idea seemed to gain merit, and he picked up the pace. When he arrived at the street which allowed him to take him to his dwelling, he turned right instead and doubled back toward the traders' district with the hopes of speaking with the 2 brothers who had arranged the sale. The brothers looked at Ephraim, then at each other, then back at Ephraim, and finally burst into laughter, the loud and boisterous kind that said, "Surely you must jest." Ephraim stood in silence as this and subsequent question. Their amusement at the explanation of his dilemma and subsequent question. After a moment, the laughter subsided enough for the elder brother to speak. "Kindly explain to us again your unusual request," he said as he winked towards his still laughing brother. The chuckle in his voice indicated that he wished to hear the humorous story all over again. Ephraim suddenly felt foolish. I don't seem to be doing too well in my business, and I had hoped that you might consider purchasing my inventory. He blurted out the words with equal parts shame and anger. Once again the brothers looked at each other and grinned. The younger one finally replied. His demeanor turned suddenly serious. "We are traders, certainly, but the goods that we sell are of the highest quality. If my memory serves, your goods came from Zadar the Jebusite. Is that correct?" Ephraim nodded. "Yes, I believe that was the owner's name." "Ah, that is most unfortunate," said the younger brother, as he shook his head. "Poor Zadar spent years developing and nurturing his reputation as a seller of subpar goods. No, we would not be able to market your items, for it would be far too damaging to our good name if we were to begin selling inferior merchandise. You were most willing to arrange the sale to me without concern for your reputation, and gladly received a healthy commission too," thought Ephraim to himself as his anger grew. "But do not despair," said the older brother. Almost immediately, "there is one possible solution. Might I suggest that you place a notion of sale bulletin at the post of the bazaar in the city square and offer your goods for sale? There is never a lack for young and idealistic would-be caravanner leaders seeking an entry into the world of commerce." Only set your price high so that you may bargain if needed, offered the younger brother, as he gently grasped Ephraim by the arm and led him to the front entrance. And with good luck, he yelled just prior to closing the door behind Ephraim. Ephraim stood on the outer stone pathway for a moment before heading towards the street. He could hear the laughter emanating behind him from the building, yet tried to block it out. Maybe they're right, he thought. It's very possible someone could be enticed to purchase the whole lot. After all, I was, he painfully realized. He thought more about the idea and reasoned it was just my work. Though much of the pottery inventory was of little value, what of the rugs and linens and other dry goods that had not been eaten through by the weevil? True. They were a season or two out of date, but could they not be salvaged and marketed by someone of greater skill? Perhaps I could sell the whole lot to a sharp trader who might rebundle the items and offer them for sale in a less sophisticated town or village. If I dust off the cargo and hide the defective items, surely someone might be lured to buy the lot. At least then I might recover a portion of my investment. Invigorated by this idea, Ephraim headed towards his warehouse. Upon arriving, he went straight to his desk and hurriedly wrote out a notice sale bulletin. He then walked the 3 blocks to the bazaar area of the city square and located an information post where he tacked up his notice of sale. His hope was quickly turned to discouragement, though, as he realized that the post contained several other such notices and offerings. Then he trudged off to his residence, even more disheartened than when he had set out earlier that evening. The next morning, Ephraim arrived at his warehouse and was surprised to find a young man waiting out at the door. "Good morning, sire," the young man said cheerfully. "I am Lavar, and am inquiring of the spices, pottery, dry goods, and other merchandise for sale." Yes, of course," said Ephraim. "Do come in." Though he had not anticipated such a quick or any response, he was thankful that the most of the damaged or worn merchandise had been hidden under the bales and out of sight the day before. As Ephraim unlocked the door, he quickly surveyed the prospective buyer before him and observed that he appeared to be a young Hebrew man within a year or two of his own age. "I see from your notice posted at the door that you are asking for 3 measures of gold for the entire lot." "I see the goods in question," asked the young man quite enthusiastically. "That is correct, and yes, you may look around at your leisure," replied Ephraim as he pointed him to the rear of the warehouse. Alrighty. Though the young man seemed quite interested, Ephraim viewed the tattered condition of his cloak and the worn appearance of his sandals, and was not overly optimistic regarding the young man's position of gold for the purchase price. After several minutes of reviewing the inventory in the warehouse, the young man returned to the small office area. "I have recently purchased our cargo wagon, and am quite anxious to begin my career as the seller of goods in our city. The price that you are asking seems reasonable." He paused as he reached into the small money purse hidden under the belt to his cloak. "Would you accept 1 gold sovereign as a deposit with the balance due on the morrow when we finalize the transaction?" Ephraim was startled by this interesting turn of events. The young man had not even attempted to bargain over the price. Ephraim found it hard to believe, but this young man actually seemed to be more naive in the matters than he had been. "Not my concern," he quickly thought. "At least I'll get my investment back." "That would be most acceptable," replied Ephraim to the young man's offer as he tried to stifle his eagerness. He removed a piece of papyrus from his desk and wrote out a hasty purchase agreement. "Good," said the young man with an obvious enthusiasm. "Then I shall return on the morrow, and we shall settle the matter." He signed his name and the address of his dwelling at the bottom of the page and returned it to Ephraim, along with the gold sovereign. He shook hands with Ephraim in farewell, and with that exited the warehouse and was on his way. Ephraim could not believe his good fortune. Barely 12 hours ago, he had held out little hope of recovering any of his initial investment. Now it appeared he would recover most of it. He placed the balance agreement in the desk drawer and went into the back to straighten up the goods in preparation for tomorrow. After working most of the day organizing and sorting the warehouse full of worn and outdated merchandise, Ephraim's euphoria was overselling the entire lot to the unsuspecting merchant gradually evolved into guilt. Honor, serve others without regard, self-integrity. Strangely, the words His father haunted him as later, but the buyer had the opportunity to review the merchandise before he bought, and Ephraim thought to himself. Besides, this is the way business is done, is it not? No point. One pointed out the defective items before I purchased them, and why should I? The rationalizations played over and over in his mind as he worked. As the late afternoon approached, Ephraim determined that the rest was needed from the conflict which raged inside his mind. He tucked the purchase agreement in the inside pocket of his cloak for safekeeping, quickly locked the building, and set out to the inn called Haja on Lower Fountain Street. Their chef makes the best lamb stew in the city. A good meal will satisfy the hunger within my stomach and settle the battle within my mind. He forced himself to think of less stressful matters. 2 blocks from his warehouse, he crossed the small wooden bridge over the city aqueduct and headed on the east. On Lower Fountain Street, toward the inn, but abruptly stopped when he had heard the laughter of children at play. Lost in his thoughts, he had not realized exactly where he was until he heard the children. The battle in his mind ceased, and it occurred to him at once what he must do. Ephraim ascended the steps at the front entrance of the orphanage and headed towards the street. Buntanan, the religious man who had become the house director of the orphanage upon Alzabar's death, had thanked him profusely, even as Ephraim explained that much of the goods were of questionable value, but would hear nothing of Ephraim's protestations. We are thrifty and industrious bunch here at the orphanage, and can find ample usage for anything that is donated. Buntanan had said with obvious gratitude. Now just one other matter to remedy. Ephraim resolved as he rushed down the street. The small whitewashed dwelling was located in a part of Jerusalem with which Ephraim was not familiar. He entered the small courtyard through the waist-high outer gate and proceeded up the narrow stone path to the entrance. He rapped gently on the door and was greeted by an elderly woman carrying an infant. "May I kindly speak with Lavar?" asked Ephraim of the woman. She nodded and retreated back into the house. Seconds later, Lavar appeared on the door and greeted his visitor with a cheerful smile. Nonetheless, he was clearly puzzled by the appearance of Ephraim at his house. "I have had a change of heart regarding our transaction," Ephraim said immediately. Lavar looked stunned. "If you received a better offer, I could possibly increase my offer a small amount," he said nervously. "No, that's not it at all," Ephraim said meekly. Then he explained the situation to the young man. "You are most honorable, kind sir," Lavar replied when Ephraim had finished. "I am deeply touched by your truthfulness." Ephraim said nothing in response and reached into his money purse, retrieved a single gold sovereign, paid as deposit, and placed it in the young man's hand. Then he turned and walked toward the street which led him to his home. As the evening sun dropped in the horizon behind him, Ephraim trudged towards his residence, resigned to accept his failure. Though he felt a slight sense of honor that he had not unloaded the goods on the unsuspecting buyer, and was relieved that the orphanage would be able to use at least some of the items, he was forced to admit that he had failed in his quest to become a successful merchant trader. Upon arriving, he entered his room, locked the door behind him, and collapsed upon his bed as a profound sense of defeat overwhelmed him. What will they say when I return to my father, begging for work? He could imagine the laughter of the young clerks and scribes, which would soon be ringing in his ears. It was a dream now, but tomorrow would be real, and he would have to face it. Exhausted, more of the mind than of the body, he drifted off to sleep. Page 69, Chapter 7. Whew. I don't know if you guys can hear it, but my back is I'm just cracking. I've turned into Rice Krispie treats. Snap, crackle, pop, Rice Krispies. Alright. Ephraim arose the next morning with a sense of dread unknown until now. The failure of his enterprise he had seen coming in the past few months had prepared his mind, but he had not allowed himself to think of the return to his father in disgrace. Now the moment he had refused to even consider was upon him. The pain of my failure as a trainer is bearable, he thought to himself, but the fact that I have failed my father is not. Demoralized and defeated, he bathed, dressed, and departed his dwelling for his father's office to seek forgiveness and an opportunity to return to his work. His first thought upon the arrival at the royal administration building was to sneak in through the less traversed north entrance. This would take him to the rear of the complex, past the custodial areas, and eventually up the service stairwell, where his chances of seeing anyone he knew were greatly diminished. Unfortunately, though, his entrance was temporarily cordoned off so that the stonemasons might repair a segment of the riser of the first floor stairs. To his disappointment, Ephraim was forced to enter through the main south entrance, which would take him directly past the work area of the clerks and scribes he had left but 9 months before. After entering the main floor and proceeding up the grand staircase to the second floor, Ephraim walked along the corridor which opened to the rows of desks occupied by his former peers. Though most ignored him with a smile and a quick wave or gesture, he felt as though the glares of 100 eyes seared into his back as he passed by. Surely they must know what a failure I am, he thought, as he made his way back to the staircase which would take him up the executive level of his father's office. At the reception area of his father's office, Ephraim was surprised to see that Obed, his father's assistant, was not at his post. He then walked to Obed's empty desk and to the outer room of his father's office. From there he could see his father's door was open, so he timidly approached and peeked in. Jared was at work, but he looked up when he saw his son standing at the door. "Come in, my son," he said calmly. "There's something I would like to discuss with you." Ephraim walked into the grand office, which was the very symbol of success, and felt much worse than he had earlier in the morning. His father stood and motioned for Ephraim to have a seat in one of the two chairs which he had faced at his desk. "My son, I have heard of your great kind gesture of yesterday," Jared said immediately after Ephraim was seated. Ephraim was astounded and somewhat embarrassed that his father knew of his visit to the orphanage. He had not planned to speak of the donation to anyone. Besides, he had eventually decided that the goods had so little remarkable value that donating them to someone in need was the only honorable thing he could do. "I do not know of your future plans, my son, but in interim, I consider your options. I have a unique task that may be of interest to you." Jared returned to his chair behind the desk and continued with his proposal. "I would not force you to ask, and furthermore, it would be unwise of us both if I returned you to your previous position. I would be condemned by the other scribes and the apprentices in my charge for showing favoritism to my son, and your spirit would eventually wither because your heart is not in the work." Oh goodness, my nose itches. Okay. Therefore, I think it best if you consider an alternative assignment, if you would care to hear of this opportunity. "Of course, father," Ephraim said quietly. His confidence had been deeply wounded, and he would gladly have taken any position his father offered. And, in a way, he was relieved that his father already knew of his failure, and that he would not have to recount it in words that would be humbling and humiliating. Jared then proceeded, "First, my son, you must forget the pain of failure and remember only the lesson which it taught you. For the only shame in defeat is to neglect to learn from it." Ephraim nodded quietly as he listened to his father. "And second, do not be ashamed of attempting a worthy endeavor and failing. A leader achieves greatness, but not because he's never tasted the bitter pill of failure, but because he does not allow his failure to stop him." Now, like the prophets of old, let us look only to the future. The father paused as he removed a piece of papyrus from the bottom drawer of his desk and began to write, the text of which Ephraim was unclear. A moment later, Jared continued speaking. "As all of our nation knows, our King Solomon is destined for greatness. He humbly walks in the ways of wisdom, and prosperity follows his every step. His burgeoning trade empire now expands to the land of the Phoenicians and points beyond. His royal fleet of trade ships, currently under construction, will soon sail to the seas in search of great and valuable items to return to our land. And above the ground, which has been broken on Mount Moriah, will someday rise amidst the magnificent temple, which will stand for generations as a monument to his adherence to the ways of the Lord, of the Almighty. A leader such as ours comes along but once in 1,000 years, my son. Thus, it is important that we record the events of his life as a lesson for all that will follow. Herein is the assignment for you to consider." He walked back from behind his desk and seated himself in a chair next to Ephraim. "I would like you to travel at the side of our King Solomon, learn his ways, observe his methods, and preserve the lessons of his life in written form, so that future generations may benefit." Jared paused momentarily as if to allow the full weight of the position to settle. "Is this something that might be of interest to you, my son?" "I am indebted to you, father, and will undertake this or any other task you ask of me with gladness," Ephraim replied. Though the memory of his father's failure lingered within his spirit, something But the new opportunity piqued his interest, and a faint spark of enthusiasm resurfaced in his voice. "Very well," said Jared, as he folded the papyrus upon which he had been writing and handed it to his son. "On the morrow, take this directive to the king's private secretary and await further instructions for the beginning of this assignment." "I will not fail you, father. I will give this my all, and you will be proud of me," the young Ephraim eagerly replied as he accepted the work order and grasped his father's hand in his. His father smiled and said nothing. He knew that if his son's desire to become a great leader in trade was genuine, this assignment with the king would fill him with knowledge and prepare him for the days when he would resume his entrepreneurial training. Cool. Woo. Okay. Chapter. I'm going to take a drink of water first. Alrighty. Chapter 8. 7 years later. Outside the temporary canvas fencing which cordoned off the new temple, the city pulsated with activity and final preparation for the great festival. Tomorrow was to be the beginning of the great feast of dedication, and the whole nation was gathered in Jerusalem to celebrate the christening of the most marvelous of shrines. As far as I could see, the people of Israel were camped on the hills surrounding the city. From the deserts of the south to the mountains of the north, they had come, bringing with them the choicest sheep and cattle from their herds for the great sacrifice. The date of this great celebration had arrived, and the energy in the air was palpable in anticipation. Ephraim strolled reverently in the open courtyard of the temple, his footsteps echoing on the stone floor. Except for the handful of priests applying a final coat of polish to the gold pilasters, the great new temple was empty. He walked in silence and marveled at the magnitude and beauty of the grand structure, which reflected on the 7-year journey he had taken on the side of his king. For the duration, the entire kingdom had sacrificed, as King Solomon had focused his people on the building of this great temple. Hundreds of thousands of man-hours, an immeasurable volume of gold and silver and bronze, and painstaking detail on every level had gone into the construction of the holy shrine. And now it was completed. It was the 11th year of King Solomon's reign, and he had led his people wisely and with integrity from the day of his coronation. Though still a young man, his honor and his fame resounded throughout the whole known world, and the legacy of his wisdom grew by the day. He led his nation in the ways and precepts. Back to that snap, crackle, popping. Oh, goodness. He led his nation in the ways and precepts of the Almighty, and prospered beyond measure in all that he did. To all it was evident that Jehovah was indeed touched the life of King Solomon, and young Ephraim ben Jared had walked beside his king for the past 7 years and recorded all that he saw. Ephraim stood at for a moment, admiring the architectural detailing of the great structure. In the distance he heard the familiar shuffling of the sandals on the smooth stone flooring. He smiled as the sound approached, and his father rounded the corner and came into view. "Magnificent, is it not?" said Ephraim to his father. "King David, God rest his soul, would have been proud to see all that his son Solomon has accomplished." "I know the feeling well," said the elder Jared. "A father's greatest joy is to see his offspring prosper and achieve and be honored." He smiled warmly to his son, and the two men walked several more paces down the great colonnade. His father resumed the conversation after a moment of silence. "What are your plans now, my son?" Ephraim glanced at his father with a look of puzzlement. He had not breathed a word of his plans to anyone but his wife, and he was surprised to see that his father seemed to know what was in his heart. Ephraim replied after a slight pause, "Father, the time has come for me to resume my journey. I'm called to travel. My dream is to become a leader in commerce and trade has been rekindled, and I am certain that now I am ready." The determination and resolve of the young man radiated in his words. "And why do you now believe that you are ready to succeed in such a competitive arena?" said Jared. He knew that answer, but wished to hear it from the mouth of his son. "Since my ill-fated venture of 7 years ago, I have searched myself to understand why it is that I tasted defeat. During the same time, I have studied our king and his ways, and likewise the habits which have caused him to prosper. I have observed the proverbs and principles he has practiced, and I have recorded them on parchment. I have observed the proverbs and principles he has practiced, and have recorded them on the parchment, as well as in my heart. And have recorded them on the parchment as well. My goodness, I keep repeating myself. These I have as a map for my journey, and this will I use to guide me. The elder Jared listened to the words of his grown son before him and smiled. Yes, I've known for some time, he said. I've watched with pride over the last few years as your prominence has grown, and it brings me great joy to see the humble yet dignified way you carry yourself. I observe how your colleagues respect you, and how the elders at the assembly speak highly of you. If you wish to continue to walk in the ways of wisdom, I have no doubt that you will flourish in all that you do. But, my son, he paused momentarily, there is one thing you must never forget. Yes, father, Ephraim waited with a sense of urgency, made all the more poignant by his father's increasing years. All great leaders, regardless of their profession, understand and practice the principle that I am about to share with you. It is the only true way to learn lasting riches and respect. The distinguished elder scribe hesitated and then continued softly and deliberately to emphasize his words. Seek never to promote yourself, my son. Rather, seek only to serve. For anything in life you desire, be it riches, honor, or influence, may be yours if you focus your efforts on helping those within your charge first get what they desire. Father and son were quiet for several moments as they continued their tour around the glistening new shrine. With the profound words resonating in his mind, Ephraim fought to control the emotion that welled within him. It seemed to be the twinkling of an eye his beloved father had become. Oh, goodness. In what seemed to be the twinkling of an eye, his beloved father had become an old man, and Ephraim was acutely aware of the dwindling number of opportunities he would have to absorb the wisdom of this man who had guided him. Though others had often repeated the wise sayings which they memorized from the sacred writings, his father's words carried real truth and credibility, for upon them he had built his life. Ephraim ben Jared silently placed his arm around his aging father's shoulder and vowed to himself that he, with the help of the Almighty, would confirm his father's creed in his own life as an example for the generations to follow. Oh man, I need to just take a little breather. Ooh. Oh, okay. Alrighty. Got it. Okay, chapter 9. The first rays of sunlight rose over the plains of the east and illuminated the outskirts of the city of Megiddo in the distance. Mahedi, the great merchant trader's chef, arrived on the patio with a pot of tea and a plate of fruits and sweet cakes for breakfast as the birds and the palm trees welcomed the new day with their chorus. Nearly 48 hours Darius had listened, spellbound, as Ephraim ben Jared shared the story of his life. The arrival of the chef in the first light of dawn reminded Darius that he and his elderly host had stayed awake the entire night. Oddly, Darius was not the least bit tired. Ephraim, though well advanced in years and accustomed to such late hours, was equally energized as he related the experience of his life to his new young friend. And so, said Ephraim, it was some 30 years ago, on the eve of the dedication of the great temple, that I left the profession of the scribe and embarked upon my career as a merchant trader. In the intervening years since that night, I have humbly attempted to follow the ways of my Maker in all that I have endeavored, and he has graciously allowed me to prosper. Yes, said Darius, your success is known throughout the land, and who is able to count the number of traders and vendors who have benefited from your mentoring? Even the children at their studies have acknowledged that of your acumen in commerce. The example of your life is unparalleled, and the Almighty has truly blessed your endeavors, said Darius sincerely. He then paused briefly as his compliments turned to puzzlement. Though I am troubled about one thing, continued Darius. You transcribed with your own hand the proverbs and principles which guided our King Solomon during the early years of his reign, and these you used to guide you in your endeavors. But why did our king, whose wisdom inspired many of the proverbs, stray from the words of truth in his final years? Ah, my young friend, you have astutely recognized the point of my story, said the elderly Ephraim, and though your words are most kind regarding the success of the Almighty has brought to my life, I believe the real lesson he would have us learn is from the examination of the king's life. The elderly man paused. he himself not fully comprehending the course Solomon's life had taken in latter years. You see, there are two critical intersections on the horizon of a man or woman's life. Continued Ephraim after a moment of reflection. One presents itself a following moment of failure, the other following the moment of success. The choices that we face in our moments of failure are the easiest. We have only to decide whether to press on or to give up. He has forward in his turn to emphasize his point. But the choices that we face with our successes are far more subtle and potentially more treacherous. It was here at the pinnacle of success that our King Solomon lost his way. How is it that a man's prosperity could be dangerous to him? Darius asked quizzically of his host. Allow me to explain by illustrating the events which lead to the apex of our king's success, said Ephraim. In the early days of his reign, King Solomon did a masterful job of uniting the people of his nation behind the great and worthy mission first envisioned by his father David, the building and dedication of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. Our people, essentially nomads since the exodus from Egypt nearly 500 years before, were ready to establish a permanent holy place for their sacrifices and worship. Thus they gladly rallied behind the king's vision and willingly gave their gold, energy, and effort to see it realized. The royal architects had advised King Solomon that the temple would require enormous amounts of raw materials for its construction and an equal amount of laborers to do the work. Consequently, the kings conscripted 30,000 men from all of Israel and sent them to the forests of Lebanon to cut the massive timbers which would be required. The men of Israel, motivated by their desires to participate in the building of this most grandiose of shrines, believed their king's promises that the forced labor would last only for the estimated 4 years required to complete the shrine. Though it became apparent that the temple would be not completed in 4 years, the men of Israel remained dedicated to the cause and continued in their labor, focused on the day when it would be finished. Finally, after 7.5 years, the great temple was completed, and what would be later be referred as the pinnacle of his reign, King Solomon declared a sabbatical for the workers and summoned all of Israel to the festival of dedication. For the magnificent structure, to a man, the people of Israel were awed. The great sacrifice had indeed been worth it. But, continued Ephraim, it was not long after the temple was completed that the king faced the first substantive test of his reign, and sadly, I must say, failed. He paused momentarily to pour a cup of tea for himself and his guest. Our king had ruled our nation for 11 years and had walked in the ways of wisdom from the time of his coronation. For this entire period, the whole of his kingdom had been focused on one goal: to see the completion of the great temple. Because of his faithfulness and adherence to the ways of the God of his fathers, King Solomon flourished in all he did, and his reputation had spread throughout Asia Minor, Mesopotamia, and even to the kingdoms of the Far East. But as his stature among the nations increased, so did his pride, continued Ephraim. Within a matter of months of completing the great temple, King Solomon foolishly began to bask in the glory of the magnificent structure, and determined that a king such as himself should live in a palatial complex fitting of his newly acquired status as the wisest king on earth. To build his palace, to rival all palaces, Solomon conveniently reneged upon his earlier promises and issued a tersely worded 2-sentence edict that reinstated the forced labor law. With the stroke of a quill and nary a thought to the after effect of his action, the king ordered the men back to the forest and forced them to toil there for an additional 30 years until his elaborate palace was completed. Because of the king's growing sense of self-importance, emphasized Ephraim, the great wisdom upon which his reputation had built gradually began to ebb from him, and his judgment became increasingly flawed. Was this alone the cause of our great king's undoing? Asked Darius. Unfortunately, my young friend, it is only part of the cause for our king's downfall, replied Ephraim. His destruction was hastened also by his lack of resistance to the temptations of his life. As his pride and ego grew, so did his appetite for pleasure and possessions. Early in his reign, the prophets warned our king to avoid taking a wife from the pagan nations of the world. Though our king had shown great respect for the world and the prophets until this point, he inexplicably chose to ignore this mandate and took the daughter of the king of an enemy nation as his bride. Soon, under the guise of forging strategic alliances with other pagan nations, he took wives from their countries as well. Without regard for the inevitable tragic consequences of his actions, our king eventually appropriated some 700 women from foreign lands to join his marital harem. His blatant disregard for this and other laws of the mighty least gradually eroded his character, and soon he soon lost touch with his people and the God of his fathers. As his wives and their worship of idols led him farther and farther astray, he spiraled so deeply into depravity that today our nation is at the point of collapse, and his own soul lingers at the entrance to the eternal abyss. Ephraim shook his head in bewilderment and continued, I ask you if the great King Solomon, with the very hand of God upon his life from the time of his birth, can be led astray by his own pride and appetites. Who among us is immune to the same danger? Darius certainly nodded in agreement as he pondered the question posed by his host. After a moment of quiet contemplation, Ephraim continued his remarks to Darius. My friend, you are a young man who has earned a place of honor among our people. Your life is full of promise, and I am certain that much success will come your way in the years ahead. Therefore, as your journey through this life carries two essential truths with you always. First, in your moments of failure, choose to learn from your defeat and press on. And second, in your moments of success, the great merchant trader beseeched his young guest, walk humbly and guard your hearts that pride and self-importance do not enter in, for these have ensnared more leaders than all other traps combined. For several minutes, the younger man and the older man said nothing as they enjoyed the serenity that accompanied the arrival of the morning sun. In the golden light of the dawn, they then clasped hands and embraced in farewell, both keenly aware and obviously pleased that the seeds of friendship had been planted. Darius, deeply inspired by this encounter with the great man, broke the silence with an uncharacteristically forward request. Teach me the laws of leadership, Ephraim, he beseeched him. He beseeched his host with eagerness that surprised even himself. Indeed I shall, replied Ephraim with a contented, near prescient certainty in his voice. I sense that our meeting was for some greater purpose, and that my spirit confirms that its time will be soon. It was nearly the midnight hour by the time Darius completed the 70-mile return trip from Megiddo to the outskirts of Jerusalem. With the exception of a few hours' rest in Ephraim's guest quarters following their all-night conversation, he had slept a precious few hours in the past 2 days and was exhausted. Unfortunately, a full night of sleep was not to be had on this night either. As he neared the north gate of the walled city, Darius was startled by the amount of activity he saw ahead of him. Normally, all of Jerusalem would be asleep at this hour, except for the sentries who stood at watch at their posts in the perimeter walls. But tonight, a great commotion stirred, and a multitude of people milled about. Upon closer examination, Darius observed that many of the people bore the unmistakable signs of mourning. Ashes upon their foreheads, and outer garments had been torn. At the moment of his realization, he heard their anguished cries of the people ahead of him. The king is dead, the king is dead, our great King Solomon is dead. Darius maneuvered his horse and chariot through the great throngs of mourners and made his way to the sentry's post, just outside the north gate. He was met by a young lieutenant, who proceeded to tell him of the events of the past 6 hours. Within a matter of minutes, a captain and 2 stone-faced guards emerged the crowd and approached Darius's chariot. You are excused, Lieutenant, said the captain to the young sentry. Spoke to Darius, and please see that this animal and carriage are returned to the royal stables at once. He directed his attention to the alarmed Darius. Follow me, sire, he said, as he led Darius to the crowd and toward the guard building some 30 paces inside the gate. Darius could only imagine the worst as he walked in step with the somber guards on either side of him. Prince Rehoboam has apparently seized power, he reasoned. What is to be my fate? And what of the other council members? Are they also in custody? Darius tried in vain to allay his fears, as the uncertainty of the situation nearly overwhelmed him. Upon arrival at the small stone building, the captain posted the 2 guards at the outer door and led Darius into its interior. He then lasted a wooden door behind him, removed the bronze helmet, and motioned Darius to be seated at the table. Please excuse the pretense of arrest, Master Darius then said to his guest, but Prince Rehoboam has decreed the imprisonment of you and other council members, and has demanded to be notified of the moment of your return. However, he fully explained, I and others within the royal guard have been sympathetic to your efforts and cannot allow this to happen. Darius sighed in relief. Upon the news earlier this day of our King Solomon's passing, my trusted subordinates spirited the other council members away where they are secure in safe houses throughout the city, and I have for you an urgent message from General Nebo and the other members. The captain removed a note from his pouch and handed it to Darius. Our council shall meet in the 12th hour of tomorrow eve, and at a place which shall be made known to you. You are safe. You are in safe hands with our kind ally. Darius folded the note and placed it in his leather attaché. There were many questions swirling in his mind, but unfortunately there was no one that could provide answers. He simply would wait until the events of the immediate future played out. We should depart quickly, said the captain. The prince's men shall come looking for you at once when his spies discover that your horse and chariot have been returned to the royal stables. Darius hurriedly gathered his effects and followed the captain out of the small guards building. Assuming the formation of arrest, the captain and his 2 lieutenants escorted Darius through the crowd and made their way toward the lesser traveled streets of the city. For the next half an hour they walked, first one way and then the other, in an effort to lose anyone who might have followed them. Eventually they arrived to a rundown inn somewhere in the southwest corner of Jerusalem. The captain led Darius around the side of the building to a narrow alleyway, and from there to a nondescript door, which led to a stairwell that bypassed the lobby. They entered and climbed the one flight of stairs to the boarding rooms on the 2nd floor. Darius was given a small room and instructions to rest for the night. Additional information and further directions would be arrived on the morrow. After washing at the bowl and pitcher of the water that were situated in the bureau, he collapsed upon the bed, exhausted from the events of the past 2 days. Though his body ached for rest, his mind refused to relax as the questions regarding the uncertainty of the future, his own and his nation's, engulfed him. After nearly an hour spent pondering the possible outcomes to the danger he faced, the rest which he craved finally arrived, and he drifted off to sleep. Oof. Well, I sure do hope that people are enjoying this. Benji, you asked if Susan approves of this, and probably not. I'm going to say that she doesn't. In the twilight before dawn, Darius was roused from the slumber to the sound of pounding on doors in the hallway outside his room. "Open up," an angry voice shouted. "We are here on the king's business and shall not be impeded." Judging by the heavy footsteps and the number of voices, it sounded to Darius as though 8 or 10 guards had arrived. Wow. I'm sorry, I'm getting so distracted. That's my bad. That is my bad. Okay. The prince's men have come for me, he thought to himself, his heart thumping nearly through his chest. From the sounds, it appeared as though they were within 4 or 5 doors and would arrive at his within moments. He frantically gathered his cloak and sandals and struggled to move the large cedar chest from the foot of his bed to the doorway. He quickly reviewed his options for exit and discovered that the window was the only way out. After removing the thin wooden lattice, he pushed out the shutters and were relieved to see that the trellis with vines extended from the ground. Had a trellis with vines extended from the ground to his 2nd floor room. He made his way down the trellis, grateful that his escape was concealed by 3 massive olive trees, which grew in the courtyard below. Once on the ground, he pulled the hood of his cloak over his head and headed for the market area at the city square to discover whatever news he could. He kept a watchful eye on his immediate surroundings as he strolled nervously and as nonchalantly as possible through the great square. Though it appeared to be the beginnings of a normal morning of buying and selling, a sense of trepidation was reflected on the faces of shoppers and merchants which he passed by. He continued to mill about for a few moments, until he noticed a group of elderly men gathered for their morning beverage at a tea stall apparently 100 paces to the left. If I can get to them, maybe I can hear the latest news and rumors. He casually but cautiously made his way through the crowd. Not halfway to his destination, though, a great commotion arose and panic swept through the crowd as 12 royal guards, dressed in full battle armor and mounted on black stallions, arrived at the scene. Frozen in fear with the rest of the crowd, as the cavalry unit advanced, Darius counted at least 6 people who lay injured on the ground, trampled by the galloping horses. A great hush fell over the crowd as the leader of the cavalry unit raised his sword above his head. King Rehoboam has declared martial law effective immediately. He bellowed with great authority, "Every man and woman to their home at once. Any lingerers shall be arrested on sight." For emphasis, the leader directed 2 guards to torch one of the small produce booths to his right. Amidst the screams and pandemonium, the crowd frantically dispersed and gathered to their homes. Darius stood in the midst of chaos and fear, pondering his next move, when 2 hooded men suddenly approached him from behind. Before he was able to elude them, the taller of the 2 men discreetly grasped his arm, while the other said, "Come with us." From the tone in his voice to the secretive nature of their dress, Darius interpreted the words as more of a command than an invitation, and thought it wise to do as they said. Besides, he realized, there was nowhere else to go. The unknown men led him for several blocks through the labyrinth-like streets of Jerusalem, with the pathways becoming increasingly narrow, until arriving at an old and apparently unoccupied warehouse in the spice traders district of the city. Darius was led into the building through a ventilation shaft at the rear alley. Once outside, once inside. Oh gosh, words are just becoming one thing. In the far corner of the dimly lit loft, Darius observed a cot, as well as a bureau, a wash basin, and assorted other items necessary for extended stay. In the next corner was a small desk with a single chair. At the top of the desk was a parcel of some sorts, wrapped in weathered canvas and bound in thin leather straps. Darius was perplexed by this whole scenario. Though he had gathered early in this relatively friendly abduction that his captors were not out to harm him, he had no clue to their intentions. The shorter of the 2 men then directed Darius to be seated at a chair by the desk. He complied, yet was immediately staggered with shock as they removed their hooded cloaks. His abductors were none other than Jalor and Jabul, chief servants of Ephraim ben Jared. In the instant before he was able to summon a response movement in the darkened corridor to his left caught his eye. He turned to see the great man himself emerge from the shadows. Darius sat in stunned silence as Ephraim drew near him and began to speak. "Greetings, my young friend. I shall delay my explanation for a moment until the surprise loosens its hold upon your reasoning." Jalor procured an additional chair, and placed it across from Darius. "I trust you will forgive the veiled nature of our meeting," said Ephraim as he was seated. "Considering the danger that exists, I thought it a prudent way to proceed." Though visibly relieved, a bewildered look remained upon Darius' face. "Tell me what occurred. Was that accurate, Ephraim, that we should meet in such secretly?" "Though still a rumor, my resources suggest that Prince Rome seeks to try the council members for treason, and I am wanted as well. I suspect that his fury is but a show of his new found power, and will soon fade. Nonetheless, this safe harbor will allow you to endure the storm. This aside," Ephraim paused briefly, "I believe that your time has been arranged for another reason." He glanced at the canvas-wrapped package upon the desk. "Before I proceed with what I have planned," he then said, pointedly, "I must know if your request that we last meet was sincere." Darius nodded without hesitation. "My zeal to gain your knowledge has only grown. Teach me the wisdom you have gleaned, Ephraim. Then it shall be as you desire. Let us begin." Ephraim looked to Jalor, who gathered the package from the desk and handed it to him. "Many years ago, at the time when my enthusiasm far exceeded my experience, I was given by our king a collection of proverbs in the art of influence. Though simple in their message and forthright in their motive, his inspired writings so moved me that I determined to apply them to every facet of my life. As the years progressed, my adherence to these principles brought prosperity to my endeavors. A few took notice and requested that I teach them. To my pleasant surprise, I found much joy in sharing of these truths, and soon found from them a series of lessons for those who had in my profession to follow. Unknown at the time, my life's work had begun." He glanced again at the back package and paused for a moment of reflection. The parcel that you see before us contains a summation of work of which I speak. With the contentment, I acknowledge that the time set aside for my purpose has concluded. For such I have need of nothing save one thing. Lest these words, which have flowered from our Maker, through my pen are duplicated and dispersed, there is danger they will die with the one who has set them to the page. Moreover, to carry them to my grave when their truths have brought such blessing would be selfish beyond shame. Therefore, I ask you to transcribe several sets of these teachings and secure them safely for the season when the message may be applied. Darius distinctively nodded his agreement. Secondly, when your task is completed, you must resettle yourself beyond the reach of the prince's spies. When the fury of the present tempest is past, quietly finalize your affairs in the Jerusalem and make your way to the city port of Jaffa on the Mediterranean. There, in this bustling crossroads of many cultures, you will find abundant opportunities to establish yourself as a trader of goods and apply the principles set forth in the writings. I shall supply you with just enough gold to open an account with some mallow at my trading house by the docks. Ephraim looked to Jalor, who removed a small pouch from his cloak and gave it to Darius. While it is well within my powers to set you at the helm over many and much, such would only harm you, for true leadership, like success, must be earned by the one who seeks it. The intensity of his gaze reflected the gravity of his words. Your struggles in this season are promised to be mighty. Shall I continue? Thirdly, as you begin your new endeavor, a time of study must join it. It matters not the venture with which you choose to embrace, nor the number of those whom you must follow in your steps. Be it one, the many, or the multitudes, the first signpost which points to leadership success reads the same for all. To give direction, you must first seek it. These teachings I bequeath you shall thus be the starting point for your journey. Ephraim handed the parcel to Darius, who received it reverently. The principles which inspire these proverbs have passed through the ages and merged with truths confirmed and intact, said Ephraim, as he set forth his instructions. The desire for prosperity has compelled you to learn. Do not be tempted to rush through the pages at ravenous speed, for the words are not intended to be devoured as a common fare at the table set for the gluttonous following a fast. They were neither given nor recorded in haste, therefore do not read them in such manner. As with any great truth, repetition, reflection, or response are required for its weight to leave a lasting impression upon the memory of the reader. Thus, counseled the master, you must develop the nightly habit of reading a selected passage from this collection and meditating upon its theme, be it courage, example, servanthood, or another. You must, as you reflect upon the words, relate them to your past experience and consider the response which is requested in your future. Then to personalize the message and seal it within, close by reading aloud the parable or self-affirming verse at end of passage. Rise on the morrow, on the morn which follows, and read it again, the selected passage, in preparation for the coming day. Throughout the day, focus on its theme and seek situations to test and improve its lesson. For it is only when you apply and not just read it does it become real to you and thus influence change. Then, at the end of your day, before retiring, read a subsequent passage within these writings in similar manner. Consequently, over the course of many days, you will have abided by each of the principles for one full day. But do not be contented to cease your studies here, for your mind is likened to a farmer's field. It is only in the consistent and persistent application of nourishing waters will a great harvest come forth. Therefore, repeat the cycle for a second period of equal days, and therefore continue yet again for as often as is needed for the letter and spirit of the teachings to root in your life. I must warn you, though, his fatherly voice grew cautionary in its tone. It is during this time that your would-be leaders grow impatient and weary of the effort. Yet you must remain diligent, for to harvest the traits of character you will need tomorrow. You must plant with repetition the seeds of wisdom today. Are you willing to commit to this course of action until the laws have become a habit? Very well then, continued Ephraim. I shall leave you with this final and most important of instructions. He leaned towards Darius and emphasized his words. Seek and associate with those who share your desire for achievement. For they shall be the ones in whom your request is made complete. Teach these proverbs to all who will receive them, and equip them with a copy to go and do the same. In such a manner alone will these writings have a chance to live on. Ephraim stood from his chair, and in a great gesture that signaled his confidence, the young man before him held his farewell bow a moment longer than was necessary. Your trials will be great, he said solemnly, and we have no certainty that these teachings will survive to the benefit of those whom will follow. But I trust that he who has stirred my thoughts will inspire your labors and keep them alive following our departure from this world. May your courage be equal to the challenge as you carry forth these words. He then turned and headed toward the ladder. Ephraim and Jared quietly descended from the loft as his servants followed closely behind. Darius watched in silence as they departed, then carefully removed the thin leather strap which secured the parcel. An odd yet comforting presence settled upon him as he gently unwrapped the loose band of collection from the parchments. He held them in his hands for a moment and was energized by the life force which seemed to resonate from within them. An unexplained sense of purpose